too far from you. I wasn't gazing at the open sky. Now I'm searching for the hero inside, 'cause he's soaring through the air, and it's really quite amazing. Every eye turned up, their hearts he's elevating.
Welcome, everybody, to the DCEU Me podcast on Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And I have two very special people joining me today. We have our co-host, Curry Morris, and we also have a guest, James Hamrick. So welcome, guys. Thanks for joining.
Good to be here, man. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this one's going to be a lot of fun because there's so much to unpack in this movie. So let's get started with some numbers here for BVS. It was released in 2016. It opened to $166 million on the weekends. So it's a very, very large opening. And it had a final domestic haul of $330 million, with $544 million coming internationally, for a worldwide total of $874 million. So, definitely, those numbers, kind of defeat the idea when people say the movie was not successful, because it absolutely was successful. But, there is some stuff that can be said about, was it as successful as it should have been or could have been? And I think that's something that we can probably discuss a little bit later. But with those numbers, guys, were you two expecting more from this when it came out, or was this about where you thought it was going to fall?
I personally was thinking $1 billion was guaranteed just because of the two characters. So I was a bit surprised and disappointed that it fell short of that.
Yeah, I would say the same. I thought it was going to be one of the biggest movies ever, or at least reasonably so. I was a little bit worried because of the divisive response from Man of Steel, but I don't think anybody expected it to get worse with this one. And I do think that affected its legs eventually. But I mean, 900 something million still isn't something to scoff at. One of the producers at the studio still talks about how Snyder's movies were the most profitable they had of the DCEU. So there's that to consider.
Absolutely. I'm pretty much in the same boat. I was expecting at least $1 billion. I was thinking it was probably going to be going 1.1, 1.2 was what I was guessing. And, and so I was disappointed that it didn't quite reach those heights that I was expecting. I do think it is a little bit interesting, though, some of the comparisons to Captain America: Civil War, and how they both were versus movies, and how Civil War actually performed worse than a lot of people were expecting as well, even though it did cross that $1 billion threshold, that it did have pretty steep drop-offs, kind of like BVS did. So, it's an interesting thing to look at to see, I don't know, was the idea of your favorite characters fighting at that point in comic book movie history not as popular maybe as it is now? We'll never really know. But so the Rotten Tomatoes score, which is, I know, our favorite topic to talk about when it comes to the DCEU, unfortunately, the movie was not beloved by critics. It came in at a 29% Rotten score from 438 reviews. It did have a better reception from audiences. It had a 63% positive from 100,000 audience reviews. Still, honestly, kind of a low audience score, in my opinion. A little surprised that it wasn't higher. What do you guys feel about the RT score and the audience score?
I personally, obviously, I don't like it. I don't agree with it. A lot of people don't understand how Rotten Tomatoes works, so people skew that in favor of their arguments with Snyder, and I think away. But when you're gauging the public response to a film, it's disappointing to see when you love it as much as we do. But at the same time, I think it was kind of a sign of bad things to come with film criticism from both the public and critics, and what was expected of this particular genre. We can get into that more later, but I want to be careful here. It almost felt like there was an agenda against it, which some of the stuff came out years and years later, but it felt very unfairly skewed negative in a lot of ways. And I've really felt like because it offered something different, people just assumed the worst and called it trash without really truly engaging and trying to understand it. So it was really disappointing for me to see 2 times in a row with Man of Steel and this.
Yeah, I do. I know like some Snyder bros can get like pretty intense about the arguments about, you know, the agenda against Snyder. But I think if you grab hold of like whatever the argument online is and you reel it back in by about 50%, you do kind of get somewhere closer to what I think is true, which is a weird, like post-Watchmen, there just became a weird conversation around him where it seemed as if there was now we had carved out the place for Snyder, and there was whatever he did, this was his place, and we knew how to talk about his movies, and that was like kind of negatively. And so the first Man of Steel teaser comes out, and it's beautiful. Like, that is one of the most incredible film teasers ever to me. And yet the argument, like right out the gate, was, well, this is going to be trash. And then it comes out, and it's a blockbuster shot like a Terrence Malick film. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's in like what the 50s, and we're giving like Ant-Man and the Wasp. And Curry's right, like Rotten Tomatoes doesn't the way it's aggregated, it doesn't always mean what you think it's saying, but it is, to me, a sad state of affairs that something like Ant-Man and the Wasp can be like, it's either like high 80s or low 90s or something, and
Yeah.
it's such a nothing movie, and a movie like Man of Steel is in the 50s. And so after that, going into BVS, there was definitely a sense of, I know what this movie is. I already have my thoughts of what this movie is, and everything I'm going to see, I'm going to reverse engineer back to like what my thoughts were beforehand. So I think there was definitely just, I mean, I can understand not liking it, I guess, but these scores compared to the so many middling films of the genre that are just kind of getting handed out like 80s like they're candy. It's just, to me, it like there's definitely something shady-ish going on.
In some way. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say I don't want to push that too hard though, because unfortunately I get some counter evidence to the fact that to the argument that it's all just a kind of an agenda is a lot of just people I know are not into it. You know, like I watched through the MCU with my parents, loving all of it, and we watched through BVS, and they're like, that's not as fun or funny as the others, is it? You know, those are a little, you know, they don't get along like the other. Like, just kind of like there's definitely just my own like anecdotal personal experience, and these are people who are not going online and like learning what the agendas are. Than any other. It's just gut reactions from people in my life is definitely telling me that, yeah, there's definitely something about this that isn't connecting with a lot of the audience. So even though I do think that there's a lot of unfair bias against him, I also don't look at these scores and accuse them of being inaccurate completely. Like the 63, that might actually skew more, like if I take out all of like my online friends that I met because of like Man of Steel and BVS, because that obviously skews the numbers pretty positive for me. But if I remove that and I just like consider just the people in my own life, 63% is either about positive or maybe even a bit more. It might be a little bit more split. So yeah, I don't look at those numbers and want to fight them as inaccurate. I just look at them and think, man, that might be true, and that makes me sad.
Yeah. You know, you mentioned a good point with like just continuing Ant-Man and the Wasp, whatever, like let's say it's at 89%, you know, 89% of those critics may have given it a 6 out of 10. Whereas the 29% that liked BVS may have given it a 9 or a 10 out of 10. You know, that's the thing with Rotten Tomatoes. But I think, and you know, I don't think my parents loved the BVS either. I don't think they disliked it. I think they liked it fine. But, you know, there are a lot of people who they're just like, you know, I didn't like it for XYZ reason, whatever. And I'm not saying it's like bad to dislike this movie. I think you're wrong. But I do think we had gotten to a point in the genre where the MCU had really started to condition people. And I'm not going to blame the MCU for like people not liking the movie, but there was a certain formula that was getting established pretty quickly. It's pretty popular. We've had offline discussions about this with the quippiness and like just the style the MCU was going for. And the DCEU up until this point had really been trying to do something different, and people didn't want that. And I don't know if it was the, socio-political times and just like the state of the industry, and did the movie come out at a wrong point? A lot of people say Watchmen came 10 years too early because of how it deconstructed the genre. So when I see the scores, kind of like what James said, it makes me sad because I do feel like there are people who are missing out that just don't try to like it. But I do think there's a large portion of people who call it trash because everybody else calls it trash. More on these movies than like pretty much any other movies I've ever experienced, other than maybe the Star Wars sequel trilogy. These two sets of movies just will make people more mad. It seems to be very much a love or hate. There are a few people I know who are kind of just like meh about it, but at least online, when you're engaging with the community, it's either you're a Snyder cultist or you're a Snyder hater who will like burn anything. I've seen both, and it's frustrating.
It is true, and I think that's interesting what you said, Curry, about the the MCU kind of conditioning people of kind of that genre just becoming the whole action comedy feel kind of becoming really popular. And we have seen that with a lot of different genres, that when the casual audience likes something, if something comes along that's different, it's not going to be as popular. I mean, you look at like the 1940s and 50s Westerns, it's like, what if we would have released, Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven in 1949? Okay, everyone would have hated it. It would have been, it would have been called the worst movie ever, whatever. Well, we know it's a classic now. And so, because back then everyone was conditioned to a certain type of Western, a certain type of thing. Now, they probably would have been shocked by the violence, but the tone was very different back then than what would come later. And so, I often think of like with BVS, like, oh, what if it was released in 2023, or 2024 or something like that? And I can't help but feel like probably it would have been much better received, I think, had that happened.
I was actually just about to bring that up. If you can take Snyder's like career trajectory out of the equation to talk about that, like forget Rebel Moon, forget Army of the Dead, like those are their own movies with their own sets of issues and like positives. But if it had released today, I do think it would have done better, because I think the genre is at a point where people are ready for something new. People are ready for the deconstruction, reconstruction. That's part of why I think the Batman was so well received. Not necessarily in the sense that it's like deconstructing like BVS and Watchmen did, but because it was very earnest in its seriousness and its groundedness and its like maturity, and it didn't try to be cute, I feel like. And there's an argument to be made. Maybe it's like a little bit like overrated too soon, stuff like that. I think, James, we talked about that before. I loved it personally, but you look back at the time and it's like everybody wanted more MCU because it was the biggest thing ever. But I also think there's another factor that comes into play. Byron, you did mention that, like how all these, like look at the Jurassic World Rebirth trailer, how it's like very MCU-ish in its quippiness, just not in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
People, when Marvel got big, Marvel really was known at the time for like X-Men and Spider-Man were like their big things. The MCU took B and C list characters and made them into huge A-listers, right? And Hulk I would say was an A-lister too. But when you go back to the primary audience, which is millennials of these movies, I would say, what did we all, not all, but what did like the fans of these franchises grow up with in the 90s? The cartoons, right? Mm-hmm. And there were Marvel cartoons, but we all know the pinnacle cream of the crop was the DCEU. Batman the Animated Series, mm-hmm. Batman Beyond, Justice League. And I think being fans of those series and those being so huge, and maybe there being like less interpretations that were like as groundbreaking as those were, I think maybe that influenced expectations. Because I can't tell you how many times I personally encountered, and this is just my life's convenient sampling, how many times people are like, why didn't they name it World's Finest? Why didn't they just base it off of the DCEU? Why didn't they just copy that story directly? How come they can't make it more like the DCEU? But at the time, I feel like it was an unfair standard to hold BVS to that Marvel didn't ever get held to. Nobody held it to the standard of the X-Men cartoon. Obviously, the movies were doing their own thing. Nobody held this, like, Tom Holland to the standards of, the animated series. There have been a lot of other Spider-Man movies beforehand, I guess. But BVS tried to do something different, and people didn't want different. They wanted kind of a representation, I think, of what they already knew. And those series, in my opinion, really permeated pop culture for a long, long time. I mean, Kevin Conroy, you ask anybody who has a casual knowledge of like Batman in the sense of like, they probably knew who Kevin Conroy is. So I don't know. That's just a theory. I have no like real evidence or metrics to back that up, but just something I've thought through before that maybe skewed like expectations going into the movie.
I think it's fairly spot on, I think, because that is true. I mean, I grew up watching, Batman, the animated series, Batman Beyond, all of that. I loved it. And that is true. Like after Nolan's reboot, that I was kind of thinking, oh, what's next? And I did kind of wonder, oh, is it going to be like that? Are they going to go that way? That's really interesting. But that's actually kind of, speaking of audience expectations, I think that's a perfect segue into the casting for BVS. And this is going to be kind of interesting to kind of talk about like some of what almost happened and such. But right before we get to the casting, one thing too is that originally BVS was actually going to be Man of Steel 2, which it pretty much is a Man of Steel 2, like, for anybody who goes in right after, it is a direct sequel. But there was originally going to be a very straightforward, Man of Steel 2 focused completely on Superman. It was heavily rumored, this was never confirmed, but it was heavily rumored that Snyder wanted Metallo to be the villain of that. And there was a lot of rumors also that Scoot, I think is it McNary? Yeah. I apologize if you listen to the podcast, Scoot, and I just butchered your name. But it was heavily rumored that he was going to be Metallo at the beginning. And like I said, none of that was ever confirmed, but it's very interesting to kind of think of if that actually would have been the case. A lot of that did change, though, when Warner Brothers kind of stepped in and insisted that this Man of Steel 2 be retooled to be a Justice League prequel instead. So basically, it kind of turned into this weird, Man of Steel 2, but also Justice League, 0.5, as well. And so a lot of that, changed, the casting elements, it changed story elements, a lot of that. And, we'll get into some of that a little bit later. But the casting for BVS is very interesting. So we're going to start off with Batman here. It was reported, now, again, this was never confirmed. Christian Bale denied it, but there was a lot of trades at the time that were reporting this, that reportedly Christian Bale was offered a obscene amount of money. Some said 50 million, some said less, to reprise his role of Bruce Wayne for Batman v Superman. And like I said, that was never fully confirmed, but let's be honest, with Warner Brothers, I can't imagine it wasn't talked about at some point, honestly, coming off of the Nolan trilogy. At the end of the day, we all know what happened. Ben Affleck was cast. He also beat out a few other actors that were considered and also rumored, which were Matt Bomer, Bradley Cooper, Josh Brolin, Matthew Good, Richard Armitage, and Joe, oh man, this is another hard name. Mangelino? Man, I'm just knocking it out of the park here with my pronunciations of names. So what do you guys think about those rumored Batman castings and what we ended up getting?
I distinctly remember being in college and, it was like all the, like, who's going to be Batman? Who's going to be Batman? And like they announced the day it was going to be announced. I was an RA in college and I was on duty, doing my rounds, and like one of my friends pulled me aside and was like, dude, they cast new Batman. I was like, who is it? He was like, Ben Affleck. I was like, no, stop. Like, who is it really? And he said it again. I remember being so upset, and I went like on a tirade on my Facebook page. I was so mad, and like, this is the worst thing ever and the worst choice they could possibly make. Why wouldn't they bring back Christian Bale? Blah, 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 blah. Fast forward, he's probably my favorite Batman, or at least maybe tied for number one with Christian Bale. So I will gladly eat my shoe on that one, because I could not have been more wrong, and I'm so glad I was. I distinctly remember reading about in the like different trades about Christian Bale being offered 50 million, whatever. Given how many reported on it at the time, I remember reading a lot of articles. I imagine it happened too, or at least the discussions took place. I, just real quick, would not have been mad at that. I actually think it would have helped the public perception of the movie. I don't know if it would have worked to have Batman go through the exact same arc that he went through, like the murderous stuff, but a version of that where Christian Bale's in it, I would have really enjoyed seeing. But ultimately, seeing what we have now in the world they built, I'm happy with what we have. But it is interesting to think about how grounded the Nolan trilogy was and how grounded Nolan's Superman, well, Man of Steel was, especially as like a first contact movie where it's a response to an alien invasion in an otherwise grounded world. I do think there's inklings of that made it in. And like you said, I can't imagine they didn't talk about it. But I remember when they showed the first image of Ben Affleck, like in front of the Batmobile, that monochrome photo they took, I was like, oh, okay, he looks good. And then they showed like, I don't know if it was the trailer or a promotional image of him at the party, like the cocktail party where he meets Clark. And people did the side-by-side comparison of the animated series Bruce and Ben Affleck's Bruce. And it's like, he had the same chin. And I was like, oh man. And my brother, who doesn't even like Ben Affleck at all, loves Ben Affleck as Batman. Like, I feel like there's people who don't like him, but as someone who was vehemently against the idea, like passionately, like was like, this is going to be a terrible decision, he won me over. And I feel like that's saying a lot for me personally.
Yeah, I remember feeling somewhat similar when it was first announced. I didn't hate it, but I did kind of have the, what? Like, really? Ben Affleck? Like, has he been in anything good? Like, I feel like he's more famous for being famous than famous for being a great actor. But I do remember over the course of the day being like, because I love Man of Steel, and I'm just rooting so much for this movie. Over the course of the day, I'm just being like, well, maybe. And then I started seeing some fan art, and I was like, his chin does look pretty good in that cowl, actually. And then, like, whenever that first promotional image came out, I was like, oh, okay. Like, this is like the Batman for me. Like, he looks perfect. I never personally wanted Bale to come back. I love the Dark Knight trilogy. I don't like the idea of going back on like the final shot with Alfred and Bruce. To me, that just feels like that should be the period at the end of the trilogy. So I wanted that to continue to be its own self-contained trilogy that never spilled out into anything else. But I mean, I love, like, Christian Bale's my favorite actor of all time. I love those movies so much. So I was like, whoever they do get has to, like, he's got such an incredible precedence, like, set for him. And yeah, as the trailers and the images came out, I was like, okay, I'm pretty set now. I'm sold on this. And I remember seeing it in the theater, that first scene, whenever the cops are down there and they're like about to open the gates, and like the women are the ones pulling the gates closed. Like, they're like, no, don't open it. And he sees Batman in the corner. I was like, oh my goodness, this take on the character is absolute perfection. I loved it. I love him as Bruce. I think as Batman, he looks by far the best. Visually, he's by far my favorite. I think overall, and it's probably because he had a whole trilogy, I still maybe lean Bale number one because he has so much to work with. But for a guy who basically had to like share, a movie, I thought this was such a phenomenal debut for the character. And yeah, I love Ben Affleck in the role.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting. Like, I had a very similar reaction as James did when it was first announced. I was like, what? Like, it was just strange. Like, I wasn't really thrilled with him being cast because I just was having a hard time picturing it. I wouldn't have minded Bale coming back. Honestly, I think it would have been very interesting. I would not have been opposed to it whatsoever. But I remember I ended up, even with the promotional images coming out of Affleck and everything, I remember I was still unsure about him. Like, I was just kind of like, I don't know about this. And I distinctly remember the moment that won me over to him was, and I don't remember which trailer it was, but I was in the theater seeing a different movie, and the trailer for BVS played. And it was that moment where, he sees the building with all of his employees falling over, and he goes running like a bullet out, and you see all these people running away from the cloud, and he's just running straight into it. And I remember in the theater, I thought, that's Batman. That is Batman. And from that moment on, I was like, I'm okay with Ben Affleck, because that was I feel like that is how I picture Batman. He's always running into the situations when everyone is running out. And I was like, oh, so that won me over. And then, of course, just so many great moments with him. Like, the one James mentioned just stands out when they go in to rescue the women. And it's like, that scene is just so intense, and they pull it in, they're like, it's still here, and I'm like, oh man, I was like, I love this Batman that everyone is terrified of, that it's like, he's the literal boogeyman, basically. It's so awesome when he's hanging off in the corner of that room with the cop when he walks by. It's just like, oh, it's just perfection.
One of the smartest but dumbest things that Warner Brothers did, that final trailer for BVS that spoiled Doomsday in the movie, I just remember being so upset that they showed that, because it spoiled so much. But it also showed a good bit of the warehouse fight in that trailer, like some of the biggest like moments of that fight. And I remember, like, in hindsight thinking, like, man, they showed too much. But I will say, like, I was pretty excited seeing him, but when I saw those clips in that trailer of him taking like people down in the warehouse, I was like, this might be the best Batman of all time. Like, that was like everything. That was the right marketing move to show people, like, hey, Ben Affleck as Batman is not a joke. He doesn't just look good in pictures. Watch this guy move, watch his presence. And that final trailer did a really good job of that. They just shouldn't have shown Doomsday, because immediately when I saw that, I was like, well, Superman's going to die. But yeah, just not only is Ben Affleck, like, he has the physicality, he has the voice, he has the ability to kind of effortlessly carry the kind of torment that Batman carries, but also sell the desperation that he has in this movie, and just to be a different Batman from any Batman we'd ever seen. Like, I think a lot of it obviously is because of Affleck's ability as an actor, but also the writing behind it and the creative, like, forming of this version of him makes him so much more interesting. All of that combined, I'm with James, where, like, the completeness of the Dark Knight trilogy, like, Christian Bale's, like, also one of my top 5 actors, so it's hard. I go back and forth. But when you're looking at, like, just, if you showed me a picture of the two side by side and, like, hey, which is the better Batman representation? Like, it's hard to not say Affleck just based on appearance alone, right?
It's so true. It's just his appearance is just incredible. And that suit, his suit in BVS is just incredible. Oh my god.
We'll get really into this later, but then just the thematic. One of the reasons I still think when they were forming the idea for this that Christian Bale was considered is because, and again, this is just me theorizing, this movie plays out the Dark Knight trilogy's line of either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. That is Batman in this movie. He becomes that. He becomes the villain instead of dying as the hero. It's like the one, not actually, this is not my headcanon. Okay, I'm just saying, like, if he didn't die, and the Dark Knight rises and retire, what would have happened to him? He could have very well become the jaded being that we see in BVS, and how it plays with the notion of, well, what if Batman did slowly start creeping towards his line? What happens if he did cross it over and over again and become the very thing that robbed him of his parents, which I don't know when y'all want to talk about the Martha moment, but leads to that. And, the idea that he was becoming the Joe Chill of Superman, taking away a mother's son, possibly causing the indirect death of Superman's mother, becoming the killer that he wanted to stop and, not become. And, people are like, well, if he was so changed by Superman saying his mom's name, why did he go kill a bunch of goons in the warehouse? Well, let me just correct the audience here for a second. That wasn't the final moment. He was probably more angry than ever at Lex and directed it at him and those goons. And there's an argument to be made in the warehouse specifically that he was fighting for someone else. He wasn't fighting for himself or for murder. So there's a lot of ways to hand wave that. The actual reason I'm good with is he was angry, whatever. The actual change comes where, despite everything Superman had been through the movie, he still dies to protect humanity. And that is what causes the change in Batman, the finality of it. And I just think that is a very Curry's Notes version of his arc that I just think is really profound and beautiful. And it's a way to give us that what if Batman became the Punisher arc without it being silly or out of character, but very humanizing to Batman. And I think that's hard to do. We see evil Superman stories. We don't really see a lot of evil Batman stories. And I think if you're going to do that, you have to give very, very compelling, thought out reasoning. And this movie runs with it very well, in my opinion.
Absolutely agree. I think the arc for Batman and everything is just brilliantly done. And I think that the casting was brilliant at the end of the day, because Affleck was able to portray all of that very well, that I'm not sure a lot of those other actors could have. I don't know. We'll never know. But I feel like he really did portray the tortured Batman very, very well. But for our next two castings here, these are interesting. So basically the casting of Wonder Woman, we all know Gal Gadot got it, and then Jesse Eisenberg got Lex Luthor. But there was some other people who were in the running for these. And so with Wonder Woman, there was, as well as Gal Gadot, there was also Olga Kurylenko, who was also considered by Snyder, as well as Elada Young, who was also considered. And I think both of those would have been very interesting choices. You can kind of see all three of those actresses very similar. You can tell he had a very clear vision of what he was looking for with Wonder Woman. And what was kind of interesting as well with Gal is that she actually revealed that she was almost cast in Man of Steel as Fiora, that initially Snyder wanted her to be in that role, but she had to turn it down because she was pregnant at the time. And so she said that she was so happy that she ended up having to turn that role down because, of course, she got Wonder Woman. But at the end of the day, I'm really glad she got it. I think she was perfect. And while we didn't get to see a lot of her in BVS, it was kind of more, cliff notes basically of her in that, and the development came later. I did think that the way he involved her in it was natural enough that I personally enjoyed it. But what do you think, James?
I think she does really well for this film. I agree that based on this, the casting list, he was definitely going for a type, somebody that would feel more exotic, as opposed to I guess what you just are any random casting table in a US based film. But which I really like. I really like that he goes for this kind of foreign Amazonian warrior type. I think I really like that direction. I think I'm more interested in the Wonder Woman that Snyder was than the one Patty Jenkins was. I think even if he were to have continued through all of his film's plans and everything, I think she would have run up into some of my issues with her acting. I think of the three big heroes, I think she's definitely the weak link acting wise. I think everything that was asked of her in this film, she can hit. She sells the physicality of it. She sells the mystique. She sells the kind of the warrior who kind of is excited about the fight. The whole Doomsday fight and everything is really good. So I think she really nailed everything that this movie asked of her.
Yeah, I would say she was the one that kind of felt out of left field. Well, I guess Ben Affleck was too, in a sense. I think the only thing I had seen her in before this was Fast Five. I think she was in the fourth one too. So I was, being a younger man, I was kind of Wonder Woman's an Amazonian, not a wrestler, but built like an MMA fighter kind of thing. I was worried, and she did obviously work out for the role and like get in shape, and she looked great in the movie. But there was a part of me that like, I don't look at Gal Gadot and think Wonder Woman, but like I said, I was pleasantly surprised when it came out. I thought, like James said, she handled her role in this movie really well because she's treated as like this mysterious kind of thing. And honestly, like, there's an argument to be made, with the exception of the final act. You could cut her out of the movie entirely and it doesn't really affect anything other than she is there to introduce the idea that there are other metahumans and beings out there. The whole flash drive with the Justice League stuff, which actually I thought was kind of clever. There was a whole like espionage back and forth with her and Bruce figuring out, and then there's like evidence of other metahumans and all. I actually really like that. Audiences and the studio seem to really latch on to Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman because she has the most appearances out of anybody in the DCEU.
The image of her running through no man's land in Wonder Woman 1 is like, I mean, it's a great image itself, and it feels like that image of that hero and that casting, like that right there probably resonated with most audiences more than any image of Superman or Batman ever did.
Yeah, and
I agree, yeah.
She's in BVS, the 2 Justice Leagues, Flash, Shazam 2. I think that's it. I think she has the most appearances, other than if Ben Affleck might be tied, if you count like little cameos. But I remember always thinking like Wonder Woman was probably the hardest role to cast, just due to the expectations around her character. So I appreciate Snyder going for the type that you suggested, James. But I remember being a little upset. I had a fan cast at the time I really wanted, and I was really disappointed they didn't do. And that was Gina Carano. I think now, I'm not saying Gina Carano had the acting chops for it. Hold on. Go back to mid-2010s. Like, at the time, I was like, she, like, physically, and I don't want to sound like I'm being shallow here, but just the physicality she can carry in the screen presence. I don't know if you've ever seen Haywire. That's the movie that convinced me that she should be Wonder Woman.
She was badass in that
She
movie.
looks like the character. Her ability, like, just in fights as a UFC fighter, I was like, man, she would be perfect. But there is a whole, like, when you talk about action movies, like things like Mortal Kombat or this, do you cast a martial artist who can do the stuff, or do you cast an actor and let stuntmen do their things? There are martial artists who can act really well. I'm not saying Gina Carano is the greatest actress alive. I'm not saying Gal Gadot is either. So, you know, maybe it would have been cool. But at the time I was like, but I like Gal Gadot. She doesn't stand out to me as like as much as Cavill or Affleck do, but I like her fine.
You picked the actress who would have been the downgrade acting wise from Gal Gadot.
No, she would have been great.
No.
She would have been great.
Listen, the character's fun in Mandalorian, but her performance is not.
Watch Haywire. Maybe that'll change your mind. That's what I was basing it off of at the time. Mandalorian, you might have a point, but still.
Yeah, like, you know, that's you both make really good points, I think, about her, and that is really funny because Gina Carano, it's true. I mean, the physicality from, like, you know, Haywire, I can definitely see like a more brutal Wonder Woman movie, like, you know, with that physicality and action, could have been pretty dope. But that's really funny. Well, now we get to a really fun casting that everybody is in agreement on, and everybody agrees it was the most perfect casting of all time, and that is Lex Luthor. So Lex Luthor was always going to be the villain, basically, according to Snyder. He always said he always pictured him being involved, whether this was Man of Steel 2, whether this was BVS, whatever it was, he always had that pictured. There was some other actors who were in contention, and the top 3 that were considered were Joaquin Phoenix, Tom Hanks, and Bryan Cranston were all considered. And I think those are all really interesting choices because they are all very different. Like, unlike with Wonder Woman, we saw a very kind of like type that he was looking for. This feels like these are kind of all over the place. He actually was brought in by Snyder because Snyder wanted him to be Jimmy Olsen, who was killed in the intro. That Snyder had said that he wanted to have this kind of like famous face as Jimmy Olsen, and then boom, he's dead, to kind of show people, look, anyone can die, look, no one's safe type of thing. But then he ended up, doing like casting with him, auditioning, and then he realized, he said to his wife, I think I just found Lex Luthor. And they ended up casting him in that role. He was obviously more of a tech bro type Lex. He was more of like a Mark Zuckerberg, an Elon Musk type. He wasn't almost anything like the comic books. I mean, if you go to like Superman Birthright, he's way more in tune with some of those more mad scientist type Lex that you see. And Snyder had said that he wanted him to be crazy, but he also wanted him to be the smartest man in the room at any given time. And he felt that Jesse kind of embodied that a little bit. When he was cast, there was outcry. People were not happy with this at all. Even though like The Social Network was it was a well-received movie and kind of recent, people just weren't really kind of drawing the parallels a little bit. And so what did you guys think about that casting? Were you on board? Were you not on board? How did you feel about it at the time?
James, I'm going to jump in because I have a feeling I know where you're going to go. I just wanted to say, I did not know that about the Jimmy Olsen with Jesse Eisenberg. Fun fact about the guy that did play Jimmy Olsen, which I could take or leave that scene, by the way. I don't love that Jimmy Olsen is killed, but I think it is kind of like a fun, this movie's not going to be what you expect type thing. That actor played the clone of Lex Luthor's baby brother on Smallville. So it was another example. Yeah, I know it's a funny sentence to say. That's another example of Snyder actually has come out and said that Smallville, he's a huge fan of it, and it's what helped keep Superman alive during dark times. And in Man of Steel, there's like half a dozen, if not more, actors from Smallville, and BVS has several as well, this being the biggest one. So I was really happy to see that. As far as Eisenberg goes, I remember like seeing the casting and just going, okay, all right, let's see what they got. I wasn't like, oh, this is going to be terrible. Or, oh, he's going to be the greatest thing. I mean, Michael Rosenbaum is my favorite personally. So I was like, he's got a lot to live up to, but Kevin Spacey was very much just Gene Hackman, like in another movie. He was just emulating Gene Hackman. Rosenbaum did his thing. We all love Clancy Brown as the voice. But I was ready for something different. And as we saw more and more of it and like his like tickiness and the stuff, I got a little worried he was going to be too Silicon Valley nepotism baby kind of thing. But after seeing the movie, I remember being a little conflicted, like, that's definitely a different Lex from what I'm used to. Then I read about Birthright, and, as I've watched it, honestly, his performance just gets better over time. It's one of those ones that's vastly different from what I think a lot of people expected. But because of how it's played, I think it's what works so well. I personally championed for Bryan Cranston. It was the Breaking Bad hype of the time. But I think if I could change one thing or add one thing to the movie, there's multiple times where Jesse Eisenberg talks about his dad. I would have loved to have seen Bryan Cranston play Lionel Luthor or whatever they wanted to name Lex's dad. That would have been pretty cool, because Lex's dad in that movie is a pretty profound impact in the backstory. He was the
Lex in front of the court.
Yeah. So I think that would have been cool. Bryan Cranston would have been great, but I like that they went for a younger Lex that's kind of like peer with Superman. The only thing, and this is a nitpick to the overall quality of the movie, like it doesn't even bother me like it used to. I hate his wig. I hate it. And they were going for the whole, like, he had the luscious locks, before they get shaved. In the scene in the prison at the end where they shave his head is phenomenal. Like, a way to like get to that, but also like, man, he could have just been bald. I just remember like everybody, there's certain scenes in the movie, I don't know if it was reshoots or just, it looks better in some scenes than others. Like on the rooftop scene, like near the end, it looks great. But the scene where it's like he's examining Zod's corpse and the scene where he's like, the red capes are coming, the wig looks terrible in those scenes. It looks awful. And so that's the one thing I don't like, but that's not really on him. But I really like him. He's probably my number 2 or 3 Lex. I'd have to really think about that. I think Gene Hackman is way overrated. That might be a hot take, but
Here, man, dude. He is so overrated.
Michael
I love
Rosenbaum,
him as an actor. I love him as an actor, but I hate that interpretation.
Rosenbaum on his podcast would always talk about how much he loves Gene Hackman as Lex and like how he thinks he's the best Lex. And James Gunn looked at him and said, "You're the best Lex." And he was like, Really? And James Gunn was like, yes, you are. And I was like, oh, I love it.
I'm in process right now of watching Smallville. I'm on season 1 right now, and I really do like him as Lex. Like, he's really, really good. But yeah, I mean, I was the same way. I didn't have a problem with him as Lex, really. I was kind of like, okay, this is interesting. This is different. I never had a huge connection to any one particular actor as Lex Luthor, so I was all right with trying new things. And I really did kind of feel like, it made sense for the world, because like the DCU right now was kind of our modern world a bit. And so I kind of liked the idea that I was like, okay, well, the robber baron Lex wouldn't really fit in this world. We would, who would Lex be in our world? And it would be someone like Zuckerberg, or Elon Musk or somebody like that. That's who they would be, because those are the ultra rich guys. And so, and I think, Jesse, he really kind of fit. I remember, the one line of his Lex when he says the bittersweet pain among men is having knowledge with no power. And I thought, like, it was such a perfect summing up of his character and his arc throughout, that he was the smartest guy in the room. He was power crazed, but he realized with Superman and with Batman, he really had no power. And I just think he really exuded that kind of bitter, cynical, angry, guy who is rich enough to actually do something with that cynicism, anger, and bitterness.
Yeah, as far as the casting went, like the way the news came to me, at first it was kind of another, because like at that point, I did that with Ben Affleck, but by this point I was like, you know what? Actually, Ben Affleck kind of feels like maybe, at least visually, he's going to look like the kind of platonic ideal of Batman. Like he'll look right. And I think Henry Cavill just looks so right as Superman. So I'm like, they're really going for like this is the definitive depiction of the character. So when they went with Jesse Eisenberg, I was like, okay, that's definitely not like the definitive look to the character. I was very much, Breaking Bad is my favorite show of all time. It's absolutely perfect from start to finish. The most amazing show ever. And so I was also like, Bryan Cranston, let's go. He's going to be perfect. He's bald in the show. Did you not see it? He's perfect. That's basically all I needed. And I know Billy Zane's name was thrown around a lot, and I think these guys would have been great. I think Tom Hanks probably would have been, if they wanted to go like the publicly, like the face that could have been enjoyed by the public and eventually get nominated as president. I think Tom Hanks actually would have been a great choice. So I'm actually super into all of those choices. But it was whenever he was described as like the kind of the Silicon Valley genius, like the socially awkward tech bro, I was like, okay, I can see that. I'm going to be okay with that. And so my hot take is, on some days he's my favorite comic book villain. It goes back and forth between him and Ian McKellen as Magneto, because that performance is also just unreal. But I don't know. I know why it's divisive. He's, weirdly enough, even though he's one of my favorite parts about the movie, he's one of the parts about the movie that I most understand the divisiveness. I'm like, every line is such a choice. Every visual tick is such a choice. And anytime you double down on like choices, you run the risk of like that choice not landing for somebody. So I totally get that. I completely understand why he's not everybody's cup of tea or cup of Granny's peach tea.
How about some Jolly Ranchers, James? How about the Jolly Ranchers? Actually, I can defend that scene really easily.
Oh no, I love that scene. What a power
awesome
move!
Mm-hmm.
What a power move from him! Oh, like there's no question who is in charge in that scene.
His whole thing is about looking for power.
Yeah.
His whole
so whenever you're talking to like a senator or whoever that guy is, and you're so confident in yourself that you can do that to a guy like that, like, yeah, I think that seems fantastic. People can get over it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So for me, every tick of his, I don't know, every weird out there choice just happened to land on like the right side for me, where I quote him all the time. There's so many line readings that are like iconic and embedded in my mind now. Like the late says the White Rabbit, right, Lemon? Like I say, or the mother of God, would you look at the time? Like there's so many lines from him that I think the red capes are coming is like genuinely iconic.
So good.
And I was already sold on him whenever he is like, I love this. I love bringing people together. You should not pick a fight with this guy. Like I love his energy. I love his energy so much in it now. Again, I get it. I get why he's so divisive. He is such a weird interpretation of the character, and I can't fault anybody for it not working for them, because it really does make sense to not work for him. But I can only speak for myself. Just loving like the characterization and all his weird tics married with like the character's motivation in the film. I'm like, man, really sometimes he's my favorite villain.
Yeah, he was, I loved, like you said, just everything was impactful. Everything was meaningful. You know, the drumming of his fingers against the desk kind of just showing his, you know, his mindset. And like somebody had pointed out that
whenever she puts her hand on his fingers, like to stop it, and you hear that little, like he hated that. He hated being put in this place and stuff like that. In a world where Gene Hackman's real estate scheme is hailed as like one of the all-time great comic book movie villains, I don't care if I'm in the minority on loving Jesse Eisenberg's Lex. I love him. I love a villain who is motivated through something other than I'm going to take over the world. He has that idea of knowledge without power. Like, you know, he's got that line about it being paradoxical. He hates the idea that he doesn't have power, but he feels like he has all this knowledge. And he also hates God. He says he hates God because no man in the sky delivered him from daddy's fists and abominations. Also, there's a great shot of Doomsday trying to punch Lex, and a man in the sky comes in and saves him from the fists. So that moment is incredible. But I love, he's got like the classic argument of, if God is all good, he cannot be all powerful. If God is all powerful, he cannot be all good. Look at the world. You know, how can both of these things be true? And so all of his life, all he can do is shake his fist at the man in the sky. He can't reach out and touch him. He can't do anything. He's got nothing to do. He's got all of this hatred, and he can't terminate it on anything. It's there. And Superman flies into the world, and all of a sudden he has this being that he can project all of this hatred onto. All of his hatred for God, all of his hatred for the lack of anything that delivered him from his own father. All of that finds its terminus on Superman, the closest thing to God he can find. And so now, because Superman is real, he feels like he gets to expose God to the world as the fraud he thinks he is. And I love that his plan, people act like, oh, Doomsday is such a random afterthought. No, he's got a plan for each side of that argument of, if God is all good, he cannot be all powerful. If he is all powerful, he cannot be all good. Batman, the Batman part of this is to show that he cannot be all good. The Doomsday part is to show that he cannot be all powerful. Both of them represent both sides of that. So if he goes and he kills Batman, he's not all good. If he dies at Doomsday's hand, he's not all powerful. So that's why he has to have them both, is to be able to prove either point if the other isn't, which I think is great. So yeah, I love this idea that all he is an angry, bitter person trying to find something to project all of this hatred onto. That is so much more compelling than the typical comic book movie villain. Most of these villains are so boring with their motivation. And every now and then they try to get dressed up with something mildly interesting, but it's never followed through. It's never, ever followed through. So I love this aspect of the character, that it truly is, and like the glee when he says, now God bends to my will, and he's got God on his knees in front of him, and the glee of throwing the pictures in his face. This is a man whose hatred has been caged up for like 30 years, and he is just unleashing it on this poor guy. And I think it is incredible. And that's why he's like maybe my favorite comic book movie villain.
It's so brilliant. And like that scene, somebody pointed it out and I hadn't realized it when I saw the movie. But like when he's holding the timer, you know, and he says, you know, when we started you had an hour, now you have less. And
I love that line too.
Yeah, oh, it's such a good line. And somebody pointed out that they said because of Superman's hearing, as he's going to Batman, he's hearing the ticking of the clock pounding in his head because he can hear everything. And they were saying how like, you know, Lex is even tormenting him from a distance because of the clock. And I was like, oh man, I didn't even like realize that.
That's good. I think too, more than probably any other interpretation, other than Smallville's a little unfair because they got 10 years to like flesh out the story. But like in terms of cinematic portrayals of Lex, they give arguably what I think is probably the best reasoning of why Lex hates Superman so much. It's not just he foils his plans, or Smallville's like, you know, they were friends and the secrets, and you know, he's doesn't use his power how Lex would, blah blah blah. But the idea of like what he represents deep down symbolically of what Lex's personal trauma put him through, like, you know, if he's got the power of
Are
God,
we going there now?
Do we want to say that? But anyways, I do think that's great. And I think that's part of why he stands out and why it works so well. And the layers of his performance of like anytime he's speaking for a long period of time, he slowly starts to lose it. The speech at the cocktail party, the red capes are coming, his like power over Superman at the end. When he starts to gain control, he gets confident. When he starts to lose it, the insecurity comes out. And and the tics all formulate that. And it's just great. But yeah.
It is just perfect. And yeah, I can't wait to get into some of the motivations that we talked about and some of the specific scenes with him, I think are going to be absolutely amazing. But, you know, going on, it's really interesting because, you know, we talked about, you know, kind of some of the stuff of, you know, some of the meanings with the film, with the characters and how it works together, and kind of going into like what the title of the film, you know, we ended up with Batman v Superman, this kind of conflict title, but there was other titles that Warner Brothers had registered. Now, we don't know how many of these were serious, how many of these were just kind of put out as, you know, red herrings, you know, we don't know fully, but we do have a list here of what were potential titles. And so I'll read them real quick and then we can briefly just kind of say maybe which ones were our favorites. But they go Man of Steel, Battle of the Night, night spelled with a K, Man of Steel, Beyond Darkness, Man of Steel, Black of Night, again, night spelled with a K, Man of Steel, Darkness Falls, Man of Steel, Night Falls, night spelled with a K, Man of Steel, Shadow of the Night, again, night spelled with a K, Man of Steel, The Blackest Hour, Man of Steel, The Darkness Within. Now, Snyder and Terrio have said that the titles that they preferred for it, that they would have gone with if it was up to them, there was 4 of them: Batman and Superman, Justice League Foundations, Justice League Rising, and then I think this was Snyder's personal favorite because it's just so weird, Son of Sun and Night of Night. And it was Son of Sun, obviously, so it was spelled S-U-N, and then Night with a K of Night. And so, you know, any of those titles jump out at you guys, you know, as something you would have liked better than BVS, or what do you think?
No. Personally, like, I think the Son of Sun and Night of Night is a cool, like, phrase that I could actually see Lex saying that in the movie. Like when he's talking about the gladiator match in the greatest history, Son of Suns, Night of Nights. Like that could have been a line of dialogue. As a title, no. Dawn of Justice is obviously a terrible subtitle, but I've actually kind of grown to really like the BVS part of it, simply because it does sound like a court case, and there's that political element to the movie that I think lends itself well to that. But none of those other titles would have worked, in my opinion.
Yeah, I basically agree with all of that. I'm not a fan. Some of those are just too, like, Justice League Rising is just too, like, too blah, cliche.
Some 54-year-old white woman came up with that in a boardroom. I'm telling you.
Yeah, so it just, yeah, I don't. They're like, they sound too much like one shade of variation away from typical subtitles, and the shade of variation is just like the K for night. I'm kind of with you in that like now Dawn of Justice sounds like just normal to me, but it's probably just because the movie's just been out. Like I've heard it since 2016, so it's like, no, it's just the name. But like thinking about it at the time it was announced, and then just thinking about it and really thinking about it now, I'm like, yeah, Dawn of Justice. That's kind of cheesy, isn't it? My preference ultimately would have been Batman v Superman. One, I love the V. That's, it's not just like a physical versus. I like the V. I think BVS is just good marketing. Like you see those letters in a row, and at least for me, I'm like, BVS. Oh, Batman v Superman. So I really like Batman v Superman as a title, and I would have liked to have just dropped the subtitle altogether. I don't like the idea of calling it a Man of Steel : other thing, but I also think it falls too short of being a full-fledged Justice League movie to have called it Justice League. So I think just letting the two of them be the title with the V instead of versus, I don't know. There's something about that really does work for me.
There was a moment I tried a couple years ago where I tried to like workshop an idea for a subtitle that involved Man of Steel, but it was like Men of Steel because Batman ends up in a steel suit at the end, but nothing works. Probably if they wanted a cheesy subtitle that inspired something that wasn't Dawn of Justice, because we all know they did it to like, hey, Justice League is coming. But if they really wanted to capitalize on fandom and nostalgia, they probably should have called it Batman v Superman: World's Finest. I don't think that title personally fits the narrative, but if you want something that like speaks to that relationship and is like a marketing buzzword, that is what they should have done. And I would have probably preferred that over Dawn of Justice, but nobody even refers to Dawn of Justice anymore. We all just say BVS, and I'm ultimately okay with that.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. Like none of these really stand out to me either. The only one that slightly stands out a bit would have been like Justice League Foundations. That one I'm okay with. I'm like, maybe okay,
That's my favorite of those. I think Foundations is the most interesting and uncliche.
I agree, Justice League Foundations would have been better. I think too, since they were dumb enough to spoil Doomsday in the trailer, why not capitalize on like the death of Superman in a title somehow, but include Batman in there? I don't know. I feel like there was a million other ways they could have approached the title. And I admit it's a hard movie to like nail down in that sense. I don't know. The marketing like side of my brain is just like, I get what they were thinking, but it was the most like corporate.
I think in reality, Batman and Superman are just such huge names that I really do think Batman v Superman, like you have the two hugest like superheroes of all time, both names in your title. That's all you need.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Like, honestly, like at the time, if I was going to be the one choosing, I probably would have said, I think Dawn of Justice is just a cleaner, like better name kind of. But exactly what you guys said, like from a marketing standpoint, you have Batman, you have Superman, you put those in your titles. Yeah. I mean, and it worked, obviously. I mean, like the opening weekend was 166 million. So people like were going to see it, based off of the hype. And
Godzilla versus Kong.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same premise of the Godzilla versus movies. They don't get really, I mean, New Empire did because it's a second Godzilla versus Kong, but they literally didn't need some cutesy subtitle for marketing. Godzilla and Kong was enough.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the marketing was incredible for it. Like people who don't really care about these movies all of a sudden felt the need to pick a side. So then
they did the whole, like, they kind of leaned into that a little bit with like BVS, but then people were like, there's the people like, oh, Batman with prep time can beat anyone. And then people are like, are you kidding me? Superman will eat him for breakfast. And it's like, both are true. Whereas like Civil War really played up the whole like Team Cap, Team Iron Man. And it was the same year. They were going to come out the same day. Like it was the year of superheroes versus each other. So I really think the marketing team and Snyder's production, they did not have good synergy at all. WB did not know what they wanted. They just wanted Marvel money.
Yeah. It's absolutely true. They were going for the most money, and that's, and I think that is why the title ended up the way it was. Now, I think when we look at the philosophical arguments and everything, I actually do like like what I think that was you, James, who said like the court case, and how it's like, Batman v Superman, and these ideologies at war. I think it kind of works, honestly, which is why I like it. But yeah, I remember at the time, like everybody was picking their sides, and of course I was a Batman guy, so I was like, oh, Batman, But yeah, it was definitely very, very interesting. And for the record, I will say this: Batman with prep time can beat anybody. I will say that as a Batman fan. And it's because Batman knows his enemies. The quote I always use is, I think it's from Hush, I think, where Batman says, if Clark wanted to, he could use his super speed and smash me into the cement, but I know how he thinks even more than the kryptonite. He's got one big weakness. Deep down, he's essentially a good person, and deep down, I'm not. I was like, and it was perfect. And it's like, it's what we saw, in BVS with Clark, holding back, not wanting to be the bad guy, which was his undoing at the end. So yeah, as it just kind of continued, on, there was a lot of hype for the movie. There was a lot of audiences who were excited about it coming out. But as soon as the movie came out, there was some issues, we'll just say, that showed up pretty quickly, where there was people who noticed that there was some unevenness in the movie in the beginning. There was choppiness, that it felt like there was some storylines that felt a little undercooked in the beginning. And, a lot of people ripped it apart because of this. I was a person who, I actually didn't mind the theatrical cut of this movie. Like, I thought it was a good movie. I wouldn't say it was a masterpiece in my opinion, but I enjoyed it. I thought it was good. Well, we ended up finding out, and what was released later was that there was 30 minutes of the movie that was trimmed for the theatrical cut. And so what was originally a 3-hour movie was cut down to I think it was 2 hours and 25 minutes or something like that. There was a lot cut out of the movie from the first half. A lot of the setup stories, I think a lot of Lex's stories were kind of hurt by that, with some of the conspiracy angles and everything. So what ended up happening was that the 30 minutes of footage was added into the movie, and it was released as something called the Ultimate Cut on Blu-ray that came out. Well, the Blu-ray was one of the best-selling Blu-rays of the year when it released. It might have been the best-selling. It's a little hard nowadays to find the full records of it going back that long. But Zack Snyder himself would later say that 80% of the film's home release revenue would come from the Ultimate Cut on the Blu-ray. So it just shows kind of what a almost mini Snyder Cut movement kind of fans buying this extended edition, and how in pretty much every fan's mind, basically the Ultimate Cut is the cut, basically. And so the Ultimate Cut was R-rated. There was blood in there. We also get the infamous bat butt that shows up in there. And it's just, it's an adult movie. What came, what we got was kind of that PG-13-ish, a little bit hard PG-13 with the theatrical, but then we got a full-on adult R-rated movie, which was cool. Now, this was an ominous foretelling of things to come with Warner Brothers, how we saw that they meddled, with this particular film, in cutting out footage. And we would later see happen with the infamous Justice League, which is going to be a very fun episode when we get to Justice League to talk about that. But we all hoped that this was just a one-off, but it was not. And so real quick, guys, what was your opinion on theatrical versus ultimate? Do you have a favorite out of the two? Are you one of the freaks who likes the theatrical better than the ultimate?
No. For me, I actually went, while you were talking, I was reminded that I got a thing about it last year, but I read my review from 2016 that I posted on Facebook, and I was just gushing over the theatrical cut, and I actually gave it a 9 out of 10 at the time. Now I would give, which would be 4.5 stars. Now I would give it 5 stars to the Ultimate Cut. For me, the Ultimate Cut wins by a long shot. I would be hard pressed to find someone who doesn't, other than maybe for pacing reasons, which is, I think Snyder has come out and said that was part of it. It could play in more theaters if they cut it down from 3 hours. That was part of why Warner Brothers made him do it. I do remember distinctly thinking, man, I wish Superman had a little bit more to do and had more agency in this movie than the theatrical cut. But a lot of the other stuff, personally, I think is a little bit overblown, because not knowing it wasn't there, it wasn't that huge of a deal other than that one thing to me. But then seeing the things that were cut, I'm like, oh, this makes so much more sense. Oh, this makes adds so much more depth. Oh, this just like enriches everything thematically, and obviously the Ultimate Edition is the way to go. Do I think, though, if the Ultimate Edition had been released instead of theatrical, that it would have made a major difference? I don't. I think it would have helped some people. I don't think it would have changed the overall perception of the movie like it would have for Justice League. It's still fundamentally the same movie, just a director's cut versus not. Whereas Justice League, it's two different films. And I think a lot of people were dismissive of the Ultimate Edition at first because Snyder was known for like director's cuts on DVD. So, and I'm even like, I mean, guys, just look at this title, man, on this Blu-ray. Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, Ultimate Edition. You don't get more of a mouthful than that when it comes to a Blu-ray title release. I don't know if they should have called it the final cut, the director's cut. There was probably a better way to market that. Ultimate Edition, to me, makes it sound like, oh, it's got the disc with the special features. Like, to this day, I still encounter people like, what's the Ultimate Edition? And I'm like, oh, no. Or Extended Edition, like Lord of the Rings. Like, lean into that.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's a way to do it better, in my opinion.
Like Extended Edition or director's cut for sure to me, because I think I'm sorry, like I'm not going to pretend that Snyder doesn't have a lot of like bro energy, like, and I like that about him. I love my superheroes to look like Greek gods who live at the gym. Like that's my comic book preference. But that's the criticism leveled at him a lot, is like he's a bros thinker kind of thing, and sometimes it gets really annoying, and you're not gonna like argue against that by calling your movie the Ultimate Edition. Like there's just something like it compounds the cheesiness of Dawn of Justice, Ultimate Edition.
And I don't know if that was him or if that was Warner Brothers. Do we know, Byron?
We do not know at this time. No.
Okay. All right.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm with you, Curry, in that like I know there's a lot of arguments. I know a lot of our friends agree with the argument, and I'm not. It's ultimately speculative, so I can't say, oh, no, they're all obviously wrong. Like, we can't know what ultimately would have happened. But I do think that the point you make is really good, that, like, Justice League versus Zack Snyder's Justice League are two fundamentally different films. BVS versus Ultimate Edition is more or less the same film. And I think if most people's complaints were, listen, like, I like the style of it, I like the feel, it didn't quite make a lot of sense. If that was the reception, then the Ultimate Edition would have fixed things. But that wasn't the reception. The reception wasn't, well, the inciting incident didn't quite work for me. And, well, it was, I don't like the tone. I don't like the casting. I don't like, the primary criticisms had nothing to do with pacing and an inciting incident and things like that. So I think it did smooth over for a lot of people after they ultimately saw what BVS was, and they're like, okay, I guess this is just the movie this is. Maybe it's not as bad. The Ultimate Edition, I'm sure, smoothed things over for a lot of people. There were a lot of articles that I read that were like reassessing BVS through the Ultimate Edition, and people were like, hey, maybe there really is something here. I think some of that would have happened even without the Ultimate Edition. I just think that ended up being a really good catalyst for that stuff. But just as far as a theatrical run, I don't know that would have changed a lot. I walked out of the theatrical cut loving it. I gave it the same, like 4.5 out of 5. I loved it. I love, like, Henry Cavill as Superman might be my favorite on-screen hero. Like, he looks great in Man of Steel, but like they pop that blue in this, and he also apparently put on like 20 extra pounds of muscle somehow. So, like, to me, I'm like, this is the greatest visually, like, looking superhero between the costume and the casting I think I've ever seen in my life.
I think when you see Henry Cavill, when he's walking into the courtroom, when he's walking down that hallway, he is just massive. Like, he's so big, but the suit it's just the colors, the contour, the texture, everything is just perfect. Absolutely.
There's a shot though. He looks like a hulking, like, literally like sculpture walking down that aisle, and then in typical Superman fashion,
oh, I know what you're talking about,
gently opens the door, and then
what a perfect moment.
That insert of him just gently opening it. I'm like, he just gets it. People say Snyder doesn't get Superman, but then there's just little moments like that like obviously mean nothing to a lot of people. It's really easy to overlook, but it's just like, oh, I don't even know if I thought about it that in depth until it hit me right then. But it's so good. Henry Cavill, he sells. People accuse him of being wooden in this movie.
Oh, boo!
They can shove it.
Yeah, he's
on that.
Wooden in this. Yeah,
that idea of like what you're saying of him not getting it. The scene when he calls his mom and she's like, Clark. He's like, yeah. It's like she's just waiting for him to say something, and he's like, hi. Like he's got nothing. He's got no agenda. He doesn't know why he's calling. He's just like, he's so confused and he needs comfort, and he calls his mom. I'm like, that's the most Clark Kent thing ever.
Byron, can I gush about Superman? Are we there, or do you want me to save it?
No, honestly, I think we can dive into the characters and themes and everything.
Can I just mention one quick, like just the quick thoughts just about the theatrical versus? Because I did want to say though that like some of the issues became more apparent to me with the Ultimate Edition. I do think retroactively watching the theatrical cut, I do think the inciting incident is kind of botched in the theatrical cut. I do not think that there is any realistic way they could have pinned the Africa thing on Superman given the theatrical cut. And I think in the Ultimate Edition, the shot of the guys running out on the horses with the drone going overhead is pure cinema. Him crashing into the drone is the coolest thing in the entire world. And then having like burning the bodies, making it actually look like a setup, and then incorporating that actress who plays, I think, Kahina, having her be a recurring presence in it, knowing she's paid off. Like, I do think those were issues there that I was kind of blind to theatrical cut because I just loved the tone and stuff. And then whenever those holes were filled in, I'm like, oh, wait, okay, I kind of get what people are saying with this particular criticism. So yeah, with the inciting incident, just coming across so much better to me, as well as fleshing out the differences between Batman and Superman. And I love the scene of like, there is a mean in him. He is angry and he is like, I love that. And the guy scratching the Batman signal into it, leaning more into the branding and hit like Clark talking to the mother and little boy, like that stuff, fleshing it out more, fleshing the Lois investigation out more. All of that, it creates a movie that, as much as I love the theatrical cut, I do think, even though it's not categorically different movies, it really smooths out the plot and fleshes it out in incredibly helpful ways, I think.
Yeah, it's actually, I don't remember if I've seen the theatrical maybe one other time since. I don't recall. But it's one of those where it actually, I think, helps the pacing because things make more sense. There's only one other director's cut that I can think of off the top of my head, and it's not Lord of the Rings. Troy actually is a movie that the theatrical cut is like 30 or 40 minutes shorter than the director's, and the director's pacing is better. But on that, you know, I do remember like seeing the Ultimate Edition and like the inciting incident. I'm like, oh, that's how that makes sense, blah, blah, blah. It didn't really bother me in the theatrical, I think, because, correct me if I'm wrong, when they're doing the court hearing, do they not still show photos of like burned bodies and stuff? Or is that
I think that's only an extended. I think the entire idea of the burnt bodies is only in the extended.
And maybe because as a superfan for me, like it was enough like, oh, Lex's goons killed all these people and leave. Maybe it wasn't a stretch for me to think, oh, Lex is framing this to be a setup against Superman, and so it just worked. But I do completely understand the criticisms. I'm with you there. That's probably why it didn't bother me though originally. But I can't say it's not an issue though. You know.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Cause I remember, thinking back when I saw the theatrical, I remember thinking about the inciting incident that it didn't quite make sense to me completely, like how it was framing Superman, but kind of the same way. I was the same way, Curry. I was like, oh, well, it's Lex, so it's like, I didn't really need to be sold on why he was being blamed for it. But then when I did see the Ultimate Edition, I was like, okay, this makes so much more sense now. And it connected the dots for me without needing to make any leaps, on my own, basically.
Lex's plan is a lot less circumstantial in the Ultimate Edition.
Mhm.
In the theatrical, I will say it's very much like, all right, this was a big bet that paid off for him, but like it's way more thought out.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. Well, I mean, let's talk a little bit about Superman, in this film, because this is essentially, Man of Steel 2. We're following up on his conflicts. We're following up on the consequences, of his battle with Zod. We're seeing how that impacted people. There's a lot of time and energy given to the consequences of his actions globally and how he helps and hurts people. That's a huge conversation throughout the first half of the movie. And so I guess we touched on it a little bit, but let's start with Henry Cavill's performance first, of how we think he did. And then we can move on a little bit to Clark Kent and Superman and the character themselves. But Curry, why don't you start us off with do you think that this was a better performance by Henry Cavill than in Man of Steel? Do you think it was the same? What do you think?
Ooh, I don't know if he's given. I don't know. The moment of him yelling after killing Zod is probably my favorite moment of performance from him from his trilogy. So there's that. I mentioned earlier that people accuse him of being wooden in this. And I think that's just because they're misinterpreting what he's going through. This is the dark chapter for Superman. This is the low point in the hero's journey, and he's very much a tortured soul. And when people aren't used to seeing that with Superman, right? They see moments of pain, but they don't see suffering. And this is a movie where Superman is suffering. And I think Henry Cavill plays a very intellectual, subdued Superman who wants to be the Superman we know and love, the outgoing, but people just don't trust him. James mentioned the moment where he calls his mom, and then he goes and talks to his mom, and they're like, she's like, Clark, be their hero, be their angel, or be none of it. You don't owe this world a thing. And some people take issue with that.
I don't love that line personally.
This is why I love it. Because it reinforces the idea that Superman doesn't owe the world anything. But Superman is who he is because he chooses to do it anyway. He's still, and it reinforces his sacrifice at the end. And it's the whole theme of, which we can get more into this later, the whole theme of he died for a world that hated him, the Christ allegory. And I like it. They frame him as a man who is doing it because it's right, not because he has some obligation or anything, but just because it's the right thing to do. And that's pretty real advice for a mother to give, and that's probably what my mom would say. So it's hey, you got to protect your kid. Having a son now, do I understand more than ever why Jonathan Kent is the way he is, the Man of Steel, because he wants to protect his son. That's his main priority. So with that, there's a lot of moments like the scene with Henry Cavill and Kevin Costner. And Kevin Costner does not do sequels, and he came back for this. So that I always like to point that out. That
he
scene
did
on
not
the
phone
mountain,
it in either.
that scene on the mountain, I was actually thinking about it the other day in prep for this. He tells that story about the horse, and Cavill's performance is just there's so much richness in how he delivers. I miss you too, Dad. But the story about the horse, and he saves the farm. They called me a hero. Grandma baked me a cake. We're down the road. Horses were drowning. I used to hear them in my sleep. That to me, and I didn't even think of this the other day, can be a direct allegory to the response of Man of Steel. Superman saved the city. He beat Zod. He saved the world. Where down the street, buildings were collapsing on civilians that he didn't have time to save. And, it's dealing with that. People don't like to think that it's wrestling with it, but it is. So I think he does really, really good. And I love the Ultimate Edition gives him more to do as Clark Kent. I think that's where he gets to step into the moral characteristics of Clark Superman as a character. I do have a small nitpick in the duality of the character. I think is a little bit missed. I'm not saying I didn't want him to be like Christopher Reeve, levels of goofiness and bumbling around, being clumsy. I'm not saying it had to be that. And I just finished binging Superman and Lois recently, and that show kind of does a similar thing. There's not a huge difference between Clark and Superman. Superman's much more assertive, I guess you would say, whereas Clark's a little bit more passive. In this, I think they could have done more to maybe make them be hey, wait a minute, Clark kind of looks like Superman. There's not a whole lot of of a difference of personality in Clark Kent. But that being said, that's a nitpick. I think what we do get is still a really good performance out of him. And I love seeing Clark Kent actually get to do investigative journalism. Like, you actually rarely see Superman do that. And when Clark's on his own and how he interacts with people, it's totally in character and totally fine. It's more like the scenes in the Daily Planet. I don't know what the clear answer is, so therefore I don't count it against the movie because, like I said, it's just a nitpick. But I like Henry Cavill's performance and like how he approaches it so much. I can like easily hand wave it.
I remember there was 2 scenes that that I really liked in BBS because I think that's interesting what you said, Curry, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this, of kind of the suffering aspect that Superman is suffering. And I remember like 2 scenes that he really sold was the first when he's on his way up to see the ghost of his father, basically. And I love that he's walking up and the people give him directions, whatever, and then they say he's going to die. And I loved that line because at first, it kind of goes over here like, oh, Superman can't die. He's not going to be hurt by it, but it was like, he's punishing himself, like he's feeling, and it was reinforcing this thing that Superman is feeling in inner turmoil because the only people who went in that direction were people who were going to commit suicide. And, it's insinuating only suffering people come this way, basically. And like Superman punishing himself going up on this path. I loved that. And then the other line is when he goes and sees Lois right after he has his confrontation with Lex on the roof. And and he's just like, he's confused, he's agitated, like he's trying to think clearly, and like Lois doesn't know exactly what's going on, and he's saying like, oh, I have to go, he has to help me or he has to die. And then you just see like this look of anguish on his face. He says, no one stays good in this world. And then he just flies away. And it was like, I love that scene so much. It's just,
I struggle with that moment a little bit. I'm not gonna lie. I struggle with that moment. That's like, if I had one moment for Man of Steel was like Jonathan Kent's death, I struggle with a little bit. I can defend it. That's the moment where I'm like, Superman's at his lowest. I get why character arc, but that is where I was like, ooh, that is dark for Superman.
It's very dark.
It's not even it's the he has to die. No one stays good in this world. It's like, oh, would Superman say that? I don't know. Like, but then you consider everything that he's put through, and it's like he's having to choose between his mother or not. And then it's funny because he proves himself wrong. He stays in character. He does stay good because he refuses to sink to Batman's level. His dying words are save Martha, save my mother. Well, he doesn't save my mother. We'll get to that. But it's I don't know the actual writing term for it, but it's when a character is in such a low place that they seemingly act out of character only to kind of like realize it and be their true selves in like the finality of their arc. There's a phrase for it, but I can't think of what it's called. And that's what that's doing. It's showing Superman in the opposite moment, like of like who you think he is, like to really showcase the disparity of the situation, only for him to come out of it even more true to himself. Because he said, no one stays good in this world. And then it ends with, no, this is my world. You are my world.
Exactly. Yeah. And I can't think of what that writing term is, but yes, I know what you're talking about, Curry. And I do enjoy seeing characters pushed past their breaking point of thinking that they're going to act in a certain way, and then they don't. It almost reminds me of like the book I'm writing with the TV show Jericho, that there's a scene of a character, where he's a good guy, but then he's going to execute this guy who's a criminal, and he's like, yeah, we're just going to get rid of him. But then push comes to shove at the end, he realizes he's not that person, and that he is a law and order guy, and he pulls back from the brink. But you don't think he's going to for about 3 seconds, and we get a little bit of that with Superman, definitely. But what is your opinion, James? What do you think? How did that scene hit you?
Yeah, it's kind of one that I do also struggle with, but I'm kind of glad that I struggle with. I was talking with some friends about a movie called The Brutalist, which I haven't seen, but I know is kind of controversial among some people, and people have issues with the ending. And something that I said there that I feel like applies here is like, sometimes it feels like we like to say we like challenging movies, And then whenever we're challenged in a movie, we're like, no, not for me. So it's like, it's just a thing we like to say about ourselves. But we truly, whenever a movie is like, hey, kind of, am I crossing a line here? Like, is this something that a movie can do?
The Last Jedi.
Yeah, exactly. Listen,
Editing that out.
as a no, I'll make your job harder then. The Last Jedi, let me tell you what, as somebody who absolutely loves both Batman versus Superman and The Last Jedi, my life on the internet was awful.
BVS actually helped me like Last Jedi more, because Last Jedi challenged me, and it took me a while to decide how I felt. I like it, you know this, but BVS is one of the reasons why, like, because of comparing Luke and Batman. But
yeah, and so that feeling of a movie really kind of challenging you and making you uncomfortable, I really appreciate that. And it's not enough for, like, it's not that, like, and because of that moment sits perfectly fine with me, because I still kind of go like, oh boy, he said that, didn't he? Like in Man of Steel, I don't really like the whole, like, what was I supposed to do? Let him die? And Jonathan Kent says maybe. I don't love that. And I think the reason, like, to go to the Martha scene in this, when she's like, you know, be their hero, be their angel, or be none of it, you don't owe this world a thing. I like the theme of Superman doing what he does, not because it's owed, but because he chooses to do it. I just don't think the Kents are where that theme should be derived. I think there are other characters and other plot devices that could drive that theme without the people who are supposed to instill his morality in him being the ones that tell him, you don't owe you, it's not up to you, you don't owe them anything. I still prefer the Kents being the people who push him to always do good even when it hurts. And so I do love that idea that Superman does what he does because he chooses to be good. I just wish that theme could have been drawn out from other sources and not have Martha Kent be the one who says you don't have to do any of this. But going back to, like, that scene, I do think we have to ask ourselves, like, when we're talking about, would Superman say that? Would blah, blah, blah? Would a character do this? I think you could say, like, okay, well, it's not just would Superman say this, but it's Superman at what point? Maybe you say, would Clark say this age 17? Well, people would probably have an easier time saying, yeah, maybe he'd say something like that when he's younger, which implies that there's a spectrum of age where at some point it's a thing he might say, and then at some point it's a thing that's just no longer crosses his mind. And so to me, it's like, are you white knuckling the idea that this is a thing he could never say once he dons the suit? And if you are, then I get why that scene is extra, like, just unpalatable altogether. But if you can give the movie enough wiggle room to say, hey, maybe he puts the suit on and he's still not fully the Superman that we know as, like, the quintessential comic book version of him. If you can entertain the idea that even after he dons the suit, he still has to find his way there, I think that scene is easier to tolerate. And I know a lot of people say that the death of Superman comes too early. I get that. I personally kind of love the sequence of it, because I think the idea is they hated him when he was alive, and it wasn't until his death that they realized what they had. And I wouldn't have wanted a DC series that had the public hating Superman for multiple films on end, so that we got his death and then everybody go like, oh, dang, he was actually great.
Funny enough, that's in line with Henry Cavill's career as Superman.
Yeah.
People hated his movies, and then they realized how much they loved him until he was gone.
Yeah.
You know?
Because he's just so great as the character. But yeah, all that to say, like, it's still a moment that does kind of make me uncomfortable, but in the way that I'm like, maybe this is the way that I like a movie to kind of challenge me to think about, like, what I'm cool with, what I think about characters, how much artistic liberty I think characters should be given. And so I don't know, it's a tougher scene, but I think his performance is incredible. I heard the wooden criticism a lot too. I hate that. I think he's introverted, which is kind of like, it's wild and almost singular in the comic book movie landscape. What other character, like, he's the face of like superheroes in general, and he's a bit more of an introverted kind of guy. He's pretty reserved in his personality, and I kind of love that. I love this Clark, and I spend most of the movie being like, dang, he just needs a hug, man. Somebody go hug this guy.
He's an introvert who wants to be an extrovert but can't because of his life experiences and all. And I think with the Kents, I do want to just talk about that a little bit more. You know, there's kind of like with Batman, there's interpretations that like the Waynes have to be like this like altruistic, like billionaire ideal, whatever. They were the perfect parents. And then there's the whole like, no, they had dark secrets. And then Gotham, the TV show, made them like outright actually evil people. I hated it. There's a way to kind of remix, I think, these things, because I would argue the Kents in BVS and Man of Steel, they aren't telling him to not be the best he can be. They actually are. To me, it's very, I mean, James, you're in Texas, but just being in the South, knowing farmers and like good, like parents and like realistic expectations of a parent and like how they would react. Like and as a dad myself, like the priority of like how you would raise your kid, would I be able to look at my son, like knowing that saving a bus full of kids is the right thing to do, but also knowing that if it was found out, all the ramifications of what could happen. Saying maybe is a painfully honest answer. And saying you don't know the world a thing, I mean, it's true. And a mother would say that, but she also says, or be their hero. I think there is a very honest parental instinct in these portrayals and the way they're written that I really respect, because there is a tendency in characterizations of the Kents sometimes to where they're just perfect parents, and there's not a lot else there. Smallville actually does a really good job with this because it gets 10 years to wrestle with this. People like to say, because the Jonathan Kent of Smallville is actually my favorite as well. Oh gosh, I'm blanking on his name right now. John Snyder. But people forget that there's moments where John Snyder is prepared to kill people to protect Clark's secret multiple times in the series, and many other dark things. And they're not perfect. They're doing the best they can, but they also do make a point of telling him, like, you have to decide the kind of man you're going to be and who that man is, because he's going to change the world. So I think off screen, it's still easily implied for me that they're still instilling the right things in him because of who he is. I get the rub, and it does challenge me too, but ultimately I do appreciate the honesty of it, if that makes sense.
I do really like the idea that, hey, we're not just going to make them be complete perfect paragons of virtue. I like that. And I don't outright hate a lot of this stuff the way some people do, where they're like, this is trash because of this line. I don't feel that way at all. And I like the idea that they're having to wrestle with, like, oh boy, when this gets out, what's going to happen. I just think there's a bit of like mixed signals from the Kents between the two films, where you do have you got to decide who the man, like what man you're going to be. Like there's this kind of expectation of like, people are going to see the real you, and you got to be good, but it's your choice, but you should be good, but hey, it's your choice, but also not yet. But when is yet? I don't know. But like, that was the big thing to me, is that it feels like Jonathan Kent is constantly talking about like, this moment is going to come, but it's like the timeline on that is very vague, and evidently the tornado scene, the time has not come yet. Why? I don't know. I don't know why that was not the right time. It feels like he's constantly being prepped for this vague future thing. And there's just, and I think sometimes the movie leans into not the moral ambiguity you get from, because I don't think it's really moral ambiguity, but it leans more into that kind of brutal honesty of like parents scared for their kids, while also wanting to like have its cake and eat it too, while still treating them like the classic Kents who are instilling virtue. And so there is a bit of that, like, well, is it, did they fully commit to this? Did they fully commit to that? I don't know.
I guess I don't want this to sound like, well, you see, James, that's the reality of being a parent. I don't want it to sound like that, but it is. That is, I fear for my kids every day, right, and want to selfishly do things that will keep them safe and keep them like risk averse, but also knowing that I have to let go and challenge them. And I think there's a lot of dialogue between the two movies that emphasize that. I do see what you're saying. I do. But I don't know, maybe a part of me just found it refreshing because it was different. I don't know if that makes sense. But
no,
well,
sure.
And I think that that's kind of the interesting thing about this movie is it's kind of like what James said about how it makes you struggle, with things. It makes you kind of go back and forth on like, okay, what was this a good message that they were giving their son? Was it good? Was it bad? Was it honest? What was it? And I think that's one of the things that I love about the movie so much is that a lot of other films don't make us ask these questions, don't make us kind of question the morality of some of our characters and what they have decided to do or not do. And I think it's just what makes BVS so special, I think, because there's so much, it has so much to say about like ethics, morality, theology, how we view, gods, monsters, men, everything in there. That I personally loved, but yeah, I'm glad that we had that conversation about the Kents, because it is definitely a sticking point with a lot of people, and and it was something that especially was a sticking point in Man of Steel, and they didn't fix it for BVS. Like they continued that kind of that issue that people had with them. And I don't know, there's part of me that applauds that they did that, and then part of me that's like, oh, maybe you should have toned it down a little bit, made some of the movie a little bit more friendly, but yeah, I think it's very interesting. But what do you guys think about, because Snyder has always been accused, and I think kind of unfairly, honestly, of them saying like, oh, Snyder's obsessed with making Superman into Jesus, and that that he's always doing that. And it's like, one, I feel like that's been happening long before. I mean, Smallville literally had Clark on a cross, in the first season, and Superman Returns had a lot of issues, had a lot of things like that as well. And so I think that's unfair. But that being said, I do feel like BVS had probably the most religious overtones of the two films that Snyder did, of Man of Steel and BVS. What do you guys think?
I think they both have a ton. I think is maybe more overt in BVS because of what happens, but I mean, it's still all over Man of Steel. And you have to look at them as I think a pair too, because it's really the birth, death, and rebirth. It's the birth, death, and resurrection essentially of Christ. It's kind of like what it's not directly, but just as like a parallel allegory type deal. That's literally what happens in the three movies. I mean, the first shot of the DCEU is Superman being born, right? Snyder is certainly not the first to ever make him, for lack of a better phrase, comic book Jesus. Smallville, it's weird. I know, I'm such a fan. Season 9, Green Arrow calls him out. He's like, who do you think you are? Some kind of modern day Jesus? Like literally it's directly addressed because he's accusing Clark of having a savior complex, right? Really great scene, by the way. But comics and stuff have done this for years, and that is kind of an unfair standard Superman as a literary character has. Is Superman a character or is Superman an ideal? And if you ask a lot of like older generations, Superman is more of an ideal to them. Christopher Reeve was an ideal to strive towards, right? Man of Steel even touches on some of this, like they will stumble, they will fall, but one day they will join you in the sun. But Superman, people forget he is also a character. To be an interesting character that can carry the weight of stories, he has to have agency. He has to have foils and flaws in a sense. And I'm not saying flaws like he secretly likes to steal cars like Captain America apparently does in certain comics. I thought that was a terrible addition, by the way. But like he has to be able to have some kind of like response and room to grow for him to be interesting. And a lot of people for a long time, I know several of them in our group of friends who didn't care for Superman because he's just the Boy Scout, right? He's just perfect. He's boring because of how perfect he is. And I tell people that they haven't read a lot of Superman stories because a lot of times it's not that way. There is a way to do it. But the Christopher Reeve, I think, perception, and this is not slamming him. I love Christopher Reeve, has kind of influenced the people to be like, no, Superman is just the everyday do-gooder, like platonic ideal of what a superhero should be. And that's it. He's perfect in every scenario, in every situation. And I'm like, you're describing Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ was a perfect man who like lived a sinless life. Superman is not that. You know, Superman's not human, but he is a like mortal, right? So with that, I think Henry Cavill's performance is unfairly judged because of that ideal that a lot of people come with preset expectations of Superman because of pop culture, not because of source material. And if you want to talk about out of character, like crazy moments with Superman in the comics where he kills or does dark stuff, oh boy, do I have some examples for you, but we won't get into that. But let's just say like the dark moments of Superman in this movie and like the perception that people have of Cavill's version pales in comparison to some stuff that was done in source material. So,
yeah, absolutely. Go for it, James.
Just as far as like the religious angle on this, I don't have a whole lot of thoughts. I think we've seen this since Neo in the Matrix, you know, and not since then. Obviously, it's been done before then. But you can't really ever have like a kind of Messiah-esque character or Savior-esque character or like this kind of hero without there being some kind, like somebody's going to make the Jesus comparison. And so, I mean, Snyder owns it with the imagery. He doesn't shy away from that. And I don't know why it would be seen as anything it's just kind of a neutral thing if like is the most negative I can go for it, where like it's an imagery choice where if you're going to have your character going to die, stretch the arms out like the crucifix, that like it's you know called unsubtle, but it's like I don't know, sometimes subtlety is overrated. Movies are a medium of images, and so give us good recognizable images. I think Wonder Woman handing down the body draped in the cape is like all-time imagery for me in a movie. So yeah, I like it's there. He's always like he was created, I think initially with, you know, you see the Jewish origins in his creation with the Moses comparison of the baby sent away to escape death in the basket, and through comic history that a lot of the mosaic imagery kind of makes a transition into more Christ imagery, and that's just it's a thing. So yeah, I
mean there's even comics where he leads the new Kryptonians to the promised land, New Krypton. Like they lean heavily into that. It's all over. Like it's not just Christ allegory, it's biblical allegory all over Superman stories. So just reinforcing what you said.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like, you know, I think, you know, just echoing everything you guys said, I totally agree with you, you know, that there's been allegories throughout Superman's entire run, comics and films. So yeah, I agree. I think it's unfair that they pin that too much, but yeah, there's a lot of just beautiful iconography in BVS. And you mentioned, James, you know, when they're lowering his body down, you know, and how, you know, it's just it goes, you know, it's kind of a mock-up of that, the passion painting and sculpture is just so well done. And, you know, so much of BVS feels like a living painting in a lot of ways. You know, like there's the scene with Doomsday and Superman when they're having the laser vision, you know, is hitting each other, and they're just kind of, you know, they're going in a circle, you know, and then it just pauses, and it's just like, oh, I want to frame this and put this on my wall.
there's almost too much to talk about in like one episode about this movie. Like, I feel like you could do a whole series of breaking down all the things. I mean, the way it's edited and structured, like the dream sequences with Bruce, you know, the world building it does, like it doesn't waste time in like unnecessary exposition. Like Zod's body goes into the thing, it warns him that this monstrosity will not be created again, but he overrides it and it creates Doomsday. Genius way to bring him in. And how they quickly show what Doomsday's powers are through visuals, and how they just communicate imagery and filmmaking technique and just the flow of the story. There's like an ethereal feel to parts of this movie that I just feel like you don't see in this style of movies very often. And it leads to just like the biggest like confrontation between Batman and Superman I feel like they could have ever imagined. Like, we've gone this whole time, we haven't even talked about the actual fight in the Batman versus Superman. But like the fight, you know, obviously it needs to work on a couple levels. It needs to work in like on an entertainment level, right? It has to be entertaining to watch, well choreographed, well shot. There's all that. But I think they went out of their way to make it personal, and it's not just a battle of like personal vendettas, but a battle of, you know, world ideologies between Batman and Superman. That's also what's clashing. That's a battle of misunderstanding. Like, there's so many layers to why they're fighting, and people just dismiss the movie. Like, why would Batman ever fight Superman? It's so stupid. There's a joke. There's a whole gag in Big Bang Theory about that. And I kind of resent that line of thinking. And I say resent lightly. I think it's not willing to engage with like the deeper things that these characters can offer. I mean, and that fight is glorious. Like, it's so good. And and Batman with prep time does win, but also because Superman holds back. They're both being true to their characters within the movie, except for Batman. Batman gets to the point. Yes, he'd already killed, but when we're talking about premeditated murder, not reactive like manslaughter, he stops. Right? He stops because he realizes he's becoming the villain that he swore to destroy. And I touched on it earlier, but I know we've gone a long time, and I can't not talk about the probably most divisive element of this movie, which is the Martha moment.
Why did you say that name?
I was hoping one of you would. I remember just on a very surface level being kind of mind blown that I never realized Martha Kent and Martha Wayne shared the same first name.
Same.
So there's a part of
either.
There's a part of you that's like, oh, that's cool. And when that hit me, I'm like, oh my gosh, when Batman, like, just having a basic understanding of who Batman is and why he does what he does, what that name would even mean for him carries so much significance. It works automatically. But then the deeper levels of like, oh, he's holding at literal gunpoint, spear point, whatever, like hostage this guy who has a mother who could possibly die, and he could take away her son. Like, he lost a parent, and like he's in the position that Joe Chill was in. There's so much happening in that scene, and the way it flashbacks and uses a beautiful eye to communicate what Batman's feeling and how he's reliving it, but also tying it into, and I think this is only in the Ultimate Edition, tying it to that was also his father's last word was Martha. It is so freaking brilliant to me. It's not, oh, they became best friends because their moms have the same name. That is such a willfully ignorant, I think, thing to read from this, but it's speaking to Batman on a fundamentally like near spiritual level, communicating what he is doing and how it snaps him out of it. I do, James, I think we've talked about this before. I do think there may be some valid points made, like, why would Superman say save Martha, but instead of save my mother? But there, to me, are so many ways. People try to say, like, well, Superman's a investigative journalist. He would have just said, you know, like, he would have known Batman's mother's name was Martha and he knew it to get out of it. No, Superman thought he was going to die. But you're also talking about a character who spent his whole life protecting his identity, who he was, his parents instilling that in him. And the quickest way for him to like get a reaction out of Batman is to say save Martha. And he's also been drugged, beaten half to death, has a spear in his face, his blood is boiling from kryptonite. Like, give the guy a break. I do not think it's as much of a stretch for him to say save Martha as some would claim. And James, I'm not saying that you're saying it's like this worst thing ever, but that to me is so hand waveable in so many ways that it's, for some, I think, again, willfully trying to miss the point because it's just so bad. It's so dumb. And I'm like, how? It's just brilliant to me. So anyways, I wanted to rant about that for a minute.
Yeah, I largely agree with all of that. I mean, I'm definitely with you on the idea that people who either they're lying when they're like, oh, this movie literally said that they decided to become friends because their mom had the same name. Like, either you're lying about that because you know that's ridiculous and that's not what's happening, or you actually believe it. It says more about you than the movie. It's obviously not because of that. And it wouldn't have been the same if the name wasn't said. They're like, why? He might as well just said save my mom. And then Batman would have been like, oh, you've got a mom. Oh, you're the thing is, when you name a thing, you make it a lot more personal. There's a great joke in Community. I can't remember the exact way, but in the first episode, Jeff Winger is like, we can attach ourselves to anything when it has a personality or a name given to it. It's like, I can tell you that this pencil's name is Ben. And they're like, they just look at him, and then I can do this. And he snaps Ben in half, or the pencil in half. And everybody's like, and they're like, you reacted that way because I told you he had a name. It was a pencil. Like, so the point is, you give a thing a name, and all of a sudden it's not a data point. It's not a statistic. It's a person. And so it's not just, oh, Superman has a mom. Superman has a mom, and her name is Martha, and she's a person. My mom was named Martha. She's a person. It's just that kind of, and the shared name was also enough to just, Batman has PTSD in this movie, full on. The shared name was just needed to shake him out of that, He needed that trigger. Martha is basically a trigger word for him in stress and in stressful situations like this. So the name Martha triggered the memory, which caused this whole, few second flashes in his head and kind of brought him out of it. It's great. I do have the criticisms of just the wording of it. I can't quite hand wave it because it does. I just think in the moment there's an awkwardness to it. Martha, you're letting them kill Martha. If he was using names to try to get Batman to go do something, say, save Martha, if he was using that to be like, hey, even if I died, go save Martha, he'd say Martha Kent, to be specific. Who knows how many Marthas live in Metropolis? So he'd say Martha Kent in particular. And if it was just, he's not really thinking at all, he's just saying things, he'd say save my mom. There's really neither scenario is one where he would just say Martha. If it's planned, it would be Martha Kent. If it's just I'm scared, I'm about to die, please save my mom, it would be save my mom. So you're letting them kill Martha, save Martha. It feels staged specifically to get to a Martha moment. It doesn't feel organic. So that's my issue with it thematically.
Inorganic. Your mom's inorganic. Yeah. James mentioned that it feels a little bit inorganic with the Martha moment. And I do think probably to alleviate that, they probably could have said, instead of saying like, you're letting him kill Martha, save Martha, they could have said, you're letting him kill my mom, save Martha. But at the same time, I read on a Reddit thread, I know the greatest, source on the internet, like, why would Superman reveal his mother to a man who has been trying to kill him the whole movie, when he's been trained to protect his secret his whole life? And he knows who Batman is. He knows what he can do. Is James right that it is directly staged to like have a reaction in a moment? Yes, I think he's right there. To me, it just works because of the background of the characters. So if he had said, save my mom, you're letting him kill my mom, why would Batman have just not said, a mother, you're an alien. You were never even a man. He literally said that a few minutes ago. Why would someone he considers not even a person have a mother? So I don't know if that would have even snapped Batman out of it. And then maybe they thought about that in the writer's room. So while they could have put like, yeah, you're letting him kill my mom, you're letting them kill Martha, save Martha, I don't know if it would have had the direct point as much. And there's an argument to be made. Superman's kind of like, "Rah, rah, rah," you know, he's been beaten half to death and all. He's not incoherent, but he's tired. Like, to me, there's just so many ways to approach it to where that kind of becomes a non-issue. What do you think, Byron?
You know, honestly, I agree with you because, you know, I did feel a little bit kind of what James said about how I kind of felt like there's a little bit of awkwardness sometimes, you know, in the way it plays out. But I do agree with you, though, that I think that, you know, so much of BVS it relies on visual language, you know, so much that they're looking, that they want you to notice certain aspects and then tie things together. Like, it's a very interactive movie in that sense, that you're not, they don't just tell you things, you see things, you hear things, you feel things, and then that forms the picture for the whole thing. And I feel like with the Martha moment, a lot of it is relying very much on that. You know, that they want you to feel for Superman. They also want you to see, okay, he has a boot that probably weighs 50 pounds on his throat, that Batman is putting probably 300 pounds of pressure on as well. He's panicking. He's feeling different things as well. And then they're also trying to do the whole PTSD thing with Batman as well. So I definitely see both sides of what you said. And I also see with what James said. And, you know, also one thing that kind of I thought of as well that I hadn't really thought of before, that going back to the visual language, is that exactly what you said, that like he doesn't view, you know, Superman, you know, as a man, you know, and I don't think this full line was in the movie, it was in the trailer, but he says, you're not a man, men are brave. And then he says in the trailer, I'm going to teach you what it means to be a man. And so he's not even viewing him. So I agree with you that if he said, you know, oh, my mother, I don't think that would have snapped Batman out. You know, the name of Martha snapped him out. But then also I thought of something too, that you see Superman's on the ground dying, basically. You then see Lois come and she's running, she's kneeling down next to him. And Batman is literally in the Joe Chill position, that like he's looking, that he remembers his mom and dad are laying dying on the pavement. Now he's looking down and there's a man and a woman laying right in front of him, you know, and having, I think, Lois there, a lot of people don't talk about, you know, Lois's interaction with Batman when he says, you know, why did you say that? And he said it's his mother's name. And then he is seeing those flashes that are going through that you see of, you know, the death of his parents. And I think the movie is framing it very much that this is the PTSD flashbacks that he's seeing in his head. And that it all comes together, that seeing this human person who loved, you know, Clark is right next to him as he's dying. And then he remembers how his father reached out, you know, to his mother as he was dying. And it all comes together for him to then realize, oh man, I'm the villain in this story. You know, I'm Joe Chill. And I think so many people grabbed onto one little thing when it's like, you really have to see the entire painting, you know, of that scene in order to realize how it's all coming together. Just my opinion.
Yeah, and I think too, I thought about, that's actually a really good point. I meant to mention, like, the final, like, 1-2 punch is Lois saying it's his mother's name. Like, it's spelling it out. And that snaps Batman out of it fully. But also, like, I don't know about you, but, like, growing up, when you called your mom's workplace, did you, and, like, some receptionist or someone answered, and are you like, hi, may I speak to my mom? No, you say, may I speak to my mom? May I speak to Melanie? May I speak to Melanie Morris? Sometimes I said Melanie, sometimes I said Melanie Morris. Or if you meet a stranger who you think might know your mother, do you go, oh, do you know my mom? No, you go, oh, do you know Melanie Morris? Or, oh, do you know Melanie? Like, at this place, like, there's conversation topics where it's like, you wouldn't necessarily say my mother, my mom, full name or whatever. You know, like, I do think probably the strongest point James has, like, why wouldn't he say Martha Kent? But I still come back to the, like you said, all that pressure on his chest, knife in his face, got the crap beaten out of him. He's inhaled kryptonite. He's only getting out a couple words, and he's barely saying them.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, and we have to consider the character protecting his identity at all costs. Like,
Mm-hmm.
this is still a murderess. He knows Batman deep down isn't an awful human being and wants to do good, but so he's doing everything he can to get these words out.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know.
No,
For me,
no,
it's easy to just kind of like reason and rationalize. We all say things that we have no idea why we said them the way we said them sometimes, you know?
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And I think also that we can, if we want to dive in even a little deeper to it too, that he knows that Batman saves the innocent. He knows that, that he's vengeful, he's a boogeyman. He goes after the bad guys, but he does know that at his core, he's going to try and help people in his own way. That, you could say that in Superman's, mind, what was left of it at that point of his thought process, that saying my mother, that he might have feared that could set Batman off even more, because then is Batman going to think, oh, there's another one, there's another alien here? We're saying Martha, he's saying a human. He's saying, oh, there's a person in danger, and he knows, at Batman's core, he goes to help people in danger, and so there's a possibility of that too, Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in a way, he's protecting his own like identity, but he's also protecting his mother, and he's humanizing his mother, because he's like, man, if I talk about my mom, he ain't gonna believe me. But if I just say Martha, maybe I have just a chance that he'll listen. And I doubt even Superman could put that much thought into it. It's desperation speaking.
Mm-hmm.
But the story also wouldn't work if you didn't say Martha. So I get like, yeah, but that's just writing. It's just framed in a way. And then they still do, like, Lois comes in and it's like, it's his mom's name. Like, they still explain it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think pretty sure like that whole time Superman's like, whoa. Like, he's like, takes him a while to stand up. Before we wrap up, I did want to get this. This leads into my nitpick, my biggest nitpick about the movie, beyond Lex's haircut and Clark's like personality kind of being the same as Superman's.
That's actually perfect, because I was going to ask if there was anything. My next question was going to be, is there anything we don't like about this movie? So this is perfect.
So I have those two nitpicks. This is probably the only issue I have, and not enough to deduct like from 5 stars. But after Batman like says, Martha won't die tonight, another great character moment. And because he's like, stop, the city needs you because of what's going on with the ship. Batman goes, he saves Martha. We've talked about the warehouse fight and all that already and how good it is. But then it cuts to Lex and the alarm goes off, and then Superman flies in. And I'm like, there's a joke in one of the chats that I'm in. It's like, what was Superman doing? Like, wait a minute. Why didn't Superman just go save Martha? Like, he could have done it quicker. And like, as soon as Alfred found the location, like, Superman could have heard that. I do remember reading that like there was a scene cut where Superman is looking for Martha and he's like hearing and he's overwhelmed by all the people that need help. I don't think that was supposed to happen in that part though. So, I mean, the logical answer, the only answer really we have is he was super weakened. But I'm pretty sure he flies off and then Batman leaves. I'm like 90% sure I looked for that last time. So I feel like a scene of him going up into the sun and healing would have helped, but they probably didn't want to do that because he does that later after he gets nuked with Doomsday. So I'm wondering if they could have shot it in a way where he, I don't know, just show what he's doing, like show him weak with Lois and like he can barely fly and like he's trying to get to the ship and he can't, which is why Batman had to do it to go save Martha. And like thematically you get why Batman had to. But the whole time I'm like, where is Superman? Because he doesn't get to the ship until later and they're not far from Metropolis. We know how fast Superman is. So that has always bugged me. It's something I can put in the back of my head because the answer is he was recovering from the fight with Batman. That's the only one we have. You know what I mean?
Honestly, I would agree with you. That was a nitpick for me as well. That I always thought that I always thought, why didn't he go and save him as well? And I agree. Like, I think some type of, even just a short 7-second scene, something would have been helpful of showing him, you know, recovering somehow. Just something in there I think would have been good. Speaking of that scene that you mentioned of him flying up and hearing all of the voices, like I really wish that scene would have come to fruition, because I think that would have been an amazing scene. You know, that being said, I know the movie is dark enough already that like adding like another like ominous, dark ethical moment in there would have been a lot. But I don't know. I think that would have been really, really cool.
Also, why didn't Anatoly Knyzev, why didn't he just kill Martha as soon as Batman showed up?
I always wondered that as well. The only answer that I had personally to me was that I always viewed that maybe he's kind of a coward, basically, that he's actually terrified of Batman as well, and he's keeping her as a hostage.
Well, they probably also realize if they kill her, they no longer have any leverage over Superman, who's the bigger threat.
That is true.
But it's like, as soon as Alfred finds the location, you would think Superman would go.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what I probably would have done was restructured, like Superman probably should have started fighting Doomsday and then the warehouse fight happened, because Batman's gone for a little bit. I'm wondering if that's how it was in the script and that it just kind of changed around a little bit. And they probably just assumed like, oh, Superman's like healing or whatnot. But that is one like logical thing missing. Like I can hand wave, you know, the goons not killing Martha because insurance against Superman. There's an argument to be made they should have gone together. You know, that would have been cool. It's
actually would have been a cool World's Finest type. That would have been kind of cool. Now that I think about it, like I get, you know, they wanted, you know, part of Warner Brothers mandate and everything was like, oh, we have to have the Trinity, you know, together, you know, fighting for, you know, the preclude to Justice League, whatever. But like, I can imagine that probably a cool flow would have been exactly what you mentioned, of basically Superman starts fighting Doomsday, Wonder Woman comes in to help him, and that fight is intercut with Batman's warehouse fight, and you kind of have like, that's the climax of the movie, basically.
The whole Death of Superman thing, like I think because the trailer spoiled it, it soured me on Doomsday for a couple of years. I never disliked it. I hated that it was spoiled, but now, like, you know, we're, you know,
especially they had the perfect moment in the trailer to cut off. They had the Trinity together and then the roar, and they could have cut it right there, and that would have been perfection. Like they didn't need to show Doomsday at all, you know?
I mean, I think everybody assumed a uniting threat would happen, but like it just, anybody who knows anything about comics, you show Doomsday, oh, Superman's dead. It just, it ruined, it didn't ruin the movie, but it ruined the predictability of it. So then it's relying fully on execution, which it did really well.
It's true. Like, you know, I've always thought back, you know, like if I was the one writing, you know, BVS back before it released, you know, I probably would have done some things differently. You know, I probably wouldn't have had Doomsday as the villain. I probably would have done more of like a Bizarro Superman with Zod, you know, as like the reanimated zombie corpse probably, and had the movie, you know, kind of continue play out the way it mostly did. But with that, I probably wouldn't have had Superman die, you know, in the end, you know, maybe badly injured or something, but I might not have gone that route. That being said, I still think the way it was executed was excellent, you know, and I love Snyder's vision of that, you know, the hopeful, optimistic Superman had to come after Superman's death. Like I'd never thought of it that way before, and I really did like that angle for it. Oh, one nitpick. This was a nitpick that I do think they needed to do for casual audiences. That I know we got the image of the dirt, you know, raising off of the coffin a little bit, like right at the end. What a nitpick that I do have is I do think that they should have had a line of text at the end, like you see in movies, that said Superman will return. I do think they should have had that, because I did see some confusion with very casual audiences. Like I remember I took my mom with me to go see BVS. She knows nothing about comics. And when we walked out, she said, oh, so is Superman dead? She said, he's not going to be in Justice League. And I had to tell her, like, I said, oh no, I said, he comes back to life, you know, da, 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 da. She had no clue. And so in her mind, this was the end. Superman was dead. Like that was the end. She didn't know he came back. And so I kind of feel like maybe for some casual audiences, that might have been just a better ending right at the end, like we got with James Bond, you know, or something like that. I don't know.
Almost like it was too subtle.
Exactly. I feel like it was a little too subtle for casual.
neither of the Justice League movies do anything with the whole raising of the dirt. They don't explain why. I think it was supposed to imply his body still had some measure of power, which is why he can even be revived. That's a good point. I definitely see what you're saying. I don't know. I think it's this. I like the subtlety of it, but I didn't think about it from a casual moviegoer's perspective. What I do think about, I cannot believe we have not talked about this. This is a nitpick, and this is something I still struggle with. Batman and his kill count and his willingness to murder here. That was a huge point of contention with this movie for a lot of people.
It was. And like, I'm going to be honest, like a little bit, there was a little bit of it with me too. Like, I'm not going to say like, I was immediately like, oh, this isn't Batman. Like, I wasn't like fist pounding on the desk. I wasn't like that at all. But I will say it did surprise me a little bit that I was like, oh, dang, he just like killed all those people.
When he cracks open the machine guns on the Batmobile and just starts like lighting the cars on fire and those dudes blow up. And I'm like, oh. And I think, the film heavily implies this. He was not always like this. Alfred's whole speech about men turning cruel, the fever, the rage, and all that. It even says like, the branding and all of that is new. The whole new mean in him, like Batman's slowly been escalating his violence. I don't say he's never killed, but it's pretty implied that like he's operating outside of his normal boundaries. And so I wish there was a little bit more of a definitive, like, who's the first guy he killed? Is the first time he ever killed is when he's stealing the stuff from the white Portuguese? When he's stealing, is that the first time he's like brutal? I wish Alfred would have made a comment like, Bruce, what are you doing? And he's like, and he could have said like, what has to be done? Because then it's like not clear, like, has he always killed like Michael Keaton did? Is this the film implies again that this is new territory for him, and he wouldn't do that. And given the context of Jared Leto's Joker is still alive, we know Deathstroke is out there, that he blinded him. If those guys are still walking around, and he lets Deadshot like be in Suicide Squad, I think it's implied through the universe and context clues that no, he was not a killer until the events of this, and he actually doesn't kill anybody that isn't in self-defense in the movie, other than almost killing Superman, I believe. Yes,
yeah, like all of his kills are reactive. Like he's doing it in either self-defense or, like you said, in a reckless homicide. It's like
stop caring is the character point. Like he steps over that line, and then he couldn't stop, which is what all the Batman media has always said. So that's where I grew to like, as a character arc, because it's the only Batman movie where Batman kills and they give a reason for it. Because story, well, The Dark Knight kind of does. The Dark Knight forces Batman into the like no-win scenario when he kills Two-Face. Tackles him off a building. But like Batman Begins, like the whole speech about the rules and stuff, like, but I don't have to save you, or I'm not going to kill you, I don't have to save you. But he blew up a whole town of ninjas in the first movie. And he blows up a ton of vehicles and stuff in The Dark Knight Rises, arguably kills Talia al Ghul. Like the Nolan trilogy is kind of back and forth with that. I love those movies. That's my nitpick about that. So this one, it inverts it with the idea of like, what if there's a Batman who slowly over time got there, stopped caring to the point of manslaughter becomes premeditated murder, because it gives a story reason for it and deconstructs Batman, but then reconstructs him into who he was with Superman's death. It works. And I it's still uncomfortable to watch.
Oh,
but,
yeah.
But when you're talking about accuracy and Batman not killing, that's really only a development over the last like 40 years or so. You read the first issue of Batman, and he's hanging people from his plane.
Yeah, he is.
Like
Batman
Michael Keaton's Batman that's Michael Keaton's Batman. That's what they base that off of.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, like Batman, like I always get irritated with them. I'm like, if you know your Batman history, like Batman was homicidal at points, in the past. Like
so was Superman.
Yeah. Oh, yes. It's like, it's only been a more, like you said, a recent thing of kind of rehabilitating these characters and changing them. And I agree with you. Like, I love that we get the reasoning, we get the, why Batman doesn't do it anymore at the end. And especially how we see this, this resurrection of his character in Justice League and why it makes it so much more beautiful. I do agree with you that I think that, we got some great conversations between him and Alfred, I think, in BVS. Like, I loved Jeremy Irons' version of Alfred. I just think it was great. And I would have liked if the movie could have maybe taken like you said, a little breather, just a couple of minutes, where Alfred is talking to Batman, maybe back at the cave, when Batman is I don't know, he's licking his wounds, whatever. And Alfred gives him some sort of speech that talks about how, his morality is slipping, and, you could let something out about how, you never murdered the criminals in the past, and it's, you've crossed a line, whatever. Like, I feel like, that we could have had a interesting conversation that didn't necessarily cross over into just blatant exposition, that we maybe could have had a character moment between them of seeing Alfred with concern that he's seeing this guy who's like a son to him is basically, going really, really darker than normal,
And I feel like they tried, like they do have the one where it's like, he, the Fever, the Rage, he says new rules.
Mm-hmm.
And, saying that line, anybody who knows Batman knows Batman's only rules, like he doesn't kill.
Uh-huh.
And so it's like, okay, that's establishing that history there, but that one line. Then they have the whole conversation about Superman and he's planning to kill him. And Alfred does call him out. And he chooses the phrase because Alfred, was in the military. He says, you're going to go to war. And he kind of dismisses him. And then, he kills all the guys. I wish Alfred would have called him out again. Like, we've always been criminals, but we never said we would kill them. Your parents would be ashamed, blah, blah, blah. They could have had a little bit of a conflict. And then when he says, Alfred, I don't deserve you at the end, it would have been even more earned because Alfred was calling him out the whole time. I'm not saying the film is less because it doesn't have it, but I think it would have added to it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like, I'm fine with like you said, the way it does it, with the way it describes it and shows it to you. But yeah, it would have just added, even more to it. And I love what I do love with BVS is that, like you said, we've had for decades, this, one rule of Batman, like, oh, he doesn't kill, whatever. I love that BVS shows us why he has this rule, that it's basically that it's like Batman is not necessarily not killing because he has such a moral code like Superman, but it can almost be inferred to that he can't do it because he would like it too much and he would go too crazy,
Under the Red Hood does a really good moment with that. And Todd asks, like, I know you don't kill, but why wouldn't you kill him? He killed me. And Batman's like, because I couldn't, if I do it, I wouldn't be able to stop.
Yeah, like I love this idea, that has existed for I want to say I don't know exactly how long, but of the idea of Batman and Joker being two sides of the same coin almost, in some ways, and that he knows he has these limits because he knows what he's capable of. And it was great seeing that in BVS. So seeing what an unleashed, and I would say not even a fully unleashed, Batman was capable of, how terrifying that is.
Yeah, it was Batman stepping over that line, but not running past it. So instead of beating you over the head with spoon feeding you everything, the film does choose to like rely on the intelligence of the audience, which I do appreciate. Maybe a little bit more spoon feeding would have helped the medicine go down a little.
Yeah. Absolutely, because I always say about BVS that yes, it's a comic book movie, yes, it's a superhero movie, but it's almost an art house movie that is disguised as a blockbuster superhero. We have never seen another superhero movie since then that has tackled the concepts, the mythology, the theology, everything that movie did. Even Zack Snyder's Justice League didn't go as in depth as BVS did.
It's much more comic booky, but it kind of had to be.
Yeah.
No, I agree. But that's probably, man, I love this movie. This movie has given me friends and many worthwhile conversations, many not worthwhile conversations. I think it changed the industry for comic book movies in a negative way, but in long term, because of Zack Snyder's Justice League and everything that happened, I think it's actually helped the industry beyond comic book films and like paving the way for creative vision and director's cuts. What is the role of the studio and the studio overreach? But how can studio like meddling be a good thing in some cases? I think there's a lot of worthwhile conversations that have come out about this. WB even allowing this to be made, I think is funny, given everything we know about them now. It will never happen again. A movie like this will never happen under James Gunn. You know, I shouldn't say that. Maybe it could. I don't see it happening.
Let's just say I don't see this type of movie happening in the DCU. Maybe an Elseworlds type movie, possibly.
Yeah. I mean,
but
Joker
not the
2.
DCU.
Yeah, the Elseworld stuff for sure, because the Joker movies are honestly, the Joker movies are probably the only comparable thing to this in terms of being so radically different. Because especially Joker 2, it's a giant middle finger to WB. I don't know if you've seen it, but man, it might remind you of this and like just inverting everything.
Mm-hmm. It's very interesting how we've been seeing that a little bit more lately, because we've seen that with Joker, with WB. You know, we also saw it with Matrix Resurrections, again to WB, you know, and, you know, very, very much of these movies where the directors wanted to do their own thing, were calling out the studio for trying to, I don't know, force their own will on them or whatever. It's like, you know, I would actually say, like, now that I actually think about it, I would say probably the Matrix Resurrections is probably the closest comparison I can think of to BVS, in the sense of a subversive, multi-layered movie that will never be made again. That
and probably Joker 2.
I need to see Joker 2.
Dude, it's going to remind you of BVS, because the conversation around that movie, I haven't seen. I mean, a lot of the DCU projects got unfair shakes. We'll get to that, but Joker 2, I cannot believe that people hated it as much as they did. It reminds me of what, like, the boldness of Snyder's vision in taking risks. But given how it flopped, we're going to get much more comic booky, like pulpy movies, which I'm fine with. But part of me does lament that the era of like very risky comic book movies is probably over, at least for a while.
I feel the only way we're going to get some of those more risky films like BVS or Joker 2 or Watchmen for that matter, again, is that we're going to have to see an almost collapse of the comic book movie industry. Like, I feel like we're going to have the DCU collapse and fail. We're almost going to need like some of Marvel's next films to, you know, fail as well. And these studios to kind of scramble and be like, okay, these are still money makers. There's still the possibility there, but we're going to have to start taking risks again. And we're going to have to start throwing stuff out and seeing how people react to it, you know? And honestly, like, you know, and I don't want to sound like, you know, a film bro anarchist, you know, but there is a part of me that wouldn't mind seeing the DCU and the MCU collapse so that we can get to a point of like more creativity again. You know, maybe, you know, kind of that late 90s, mid 2000s, where we were getting X-Men, we were getting, you know, the Spider-Man movies, you know, we were getting Watchmen, we were getting this kind of, you know, the Dark Knight trilogy, we were getting like, just, you know, we were eating so good, you know, with this different style that I hope maybe something like that can come back again. I don't know, you know, we won't know for a couple of years, you know.
I think for me, I want a return to stop focusing on the have a shared universe, but stop worrying about setting everything up and just make a good movie. Like, and focus on the like writing of it. The DCU is the best chance to do that. And then, and with the like them even openly saying, yeah, we're going to be doing Elseworlds movies. Marvel fans are not happy with Elseworlds movies because it was the Sony trash that's been coming out. You know, so that's my thing. Like, if we ever want a BVS or even like a return of the DCU with Henry Cavill and them, we need the DCU to be successful. I'm afraid if it tanks, that's it. It'll be like Westerns. They'll just go away. And I'm concerned about that, but we'll see what happens.
No, it's very true. It's going to be interesting, you know, to see what happens, and, you know, what direction the audience takes and the studios as well. Because I agree with you. I could see, you know, CBMs going the route of Westerns if it fails. You know, it's like, it's a 50-50 chance. You know, they either are going to go in the experimental direction to try and make it work again, or it'll just be, hey, let's focus on video games now. You know, it's like,
right, exactly.
you don't really know.
BVS is a masterpiece. I'm not afraid to say it.
No, I'm not either. It's my favorite comic book movie of all time. You know, it's a 5-star, you know.
It's my number 4, but it's top 5. For sure. Yeah.
It's, you know, I would say there's definitely some other ones that come very, very close, you know, like, you know, Spider-Man 1 is very, very close in that
so
top 5. You know, it's so good. And, you know, there's a few when I saw Man of Steel, you know, I was like, oh man, this is so good. You know, but then when I watched BVS again, I was just like, it reminded me, I was like, oh, I think this is my favorite comic book movie of all time.
It makes the Mount Rushmore of like 4, you know. Like for me, it's Dark Knight, Spider-Man 2, Man of Steel, BVS. Those are the 4 movies.
And it's like you look at those ones that you just mentioned, and they're so good that it's almost like it's hard to almost rank 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you know, because they all are so good in their own way.
I could flip on a dime. Like BVS and Man of Steel, especially, I go back and forth. As of right now, that's how I would do it. But it's like I don't mean this the way it sounds, but it's like choosing between your children. Like what?
Yeah.
Yeah. But this is art, so I can actually rank them.
What is your 1 out of 5 star ranking on Letterboxd?
5 out of 5 stars.
I know it's controversial. It is my favorite comic book movie of all time. So
I echo that. 5 out of 5 stars as well. It's a great movie. You know, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think we really, you know, delved into some very interesting topics, you know, with the movie. And I think we even we even tread some new ground, I think, with some stuff that the three of us hadn't really talked about before or hadn't realized, you know, that was really interesting.
I love this movie, and I've spent a long time defending it. Probably, I won't say an unhealthy amount of time, but you know, are you ever in public with like people and like somebody just goes, yeah, well, BVS was trash. And you're like, are you ready for this conversation? And like, then people are like, oh, you loved it. You loved that. And you're like, man, stop gaslighting me and just let me talk.
Yeah, it is true. I have had so many debates about this movie over the years, almost 10 years now. And, you know, and I'm sure it's going to be something I'm going to be defending for years to come, because honestly, I don't see the conversation around this movie dying out anytime soon. Like,
I think people will come around on it eventually.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. Like, I think the so-called Justice League trilogy, as they're calling it now, of Man of Steel, BVS, and Justice League, you know, I think it's going to keep going up, you know, in people's opinions, because, you know, you look at, you know, the Spider-Man trilogy. Spider-Man 3 is so much more well-regarded now than it was on release. People hated it on release. People really like it now, despite
look at the Star Wars prequels, you know, and for a direct comparison, even the Batman movies from the 90s are seeing a resurgence. Like, people hated Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, but now, like, they kind of have their fans and they've had their day in the limelight. And for a direct comparison, like, Watchmen was pretty divisive when it came out. And now people are looking back like, holy cow, this film was like predictive of like this whole genre and blah, blah, blah. So I think BVS will have its day too.
Absolutely agree. Like, I think probably in 10 years, I think we're gonna see it start hitting a lot of the lists, you know, of the top 10s. You know, it's gonna take a little bit of time, but I think it absolutely is going to. And,
for sure.
You know, yeah. So, well, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in to the DCEU Me podcast, episode 2 on Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. If you have not already, please subscribe to the podcast and share it with your friends. We're going to have a lot more episodes coming out very soon. You know, it's going to be very exciting to talk about the next movie in the DCEU Me. There's going to be a lot to talk about with that one. Most of it is probably not going to be directly related to the movie, but the movie that is not released yet, actually. And so, but it's going to be a lot of fun. So thank you all for following us. And we look forward to you joining us for episode 3 coming very soon. And now we've reached that time in the episode, and you all know what it is. So without further ado, hit it, Curry.
Imagine DCE, you and me, how happy we could be if they just finished it. So happy with Snyder.